Section 1. The world that ended in 2 hours. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture the morning of October 23, 2077. Somewhere in the American East, the sun had barely cleared the rooftops. People were commuting to work. Children were filing into classrooms. A weatherman was giving a forecast nobody was really listening to. And somewhere out in the Pacific, or maybe deep in a bunker that no history book would ever record, someone made a decision that took 2 hours to destroy most of the known world. That is where the Fallout universe begins. Not with a single explosion. Not with a villain twirling a remote detonator in some underground lair. It begins with a question that the games themselves have never fully answered, and that question has been quietly haunting fans since the very first game released in 1997. Who dropped the first bomb? The Fallout Bible, a collection of lore and design notes assembled by series writer Chris Avellone, states plainly that bombs were launched on October 23, 2077, and that who struck first is unknown. The document even adds that it is not even known whether the bombs came from China or America. That ambiguity was intentional. The creators of Fallout wanted the apocalypse to feel like something that happened the way real wars escalate, chaotically, with blame running in every direction and no clean answer at the end. But the ambiguity did not sit still. Over decades, the games layered in details that complicated the picture further, and in 2023, Fallout co-creator Tim Kaine sat down for an interview and said something that many fans had been theorizing about for years. According to Kaine, it was China that launched first. His reasoning was specific. The United States had been conducting illegal research into biological weapons, most notably a virus called FEV, the Forced Evolutionary Virus, which would eventually give rise to super mutants. China apparently discovered this. They issued warnings. The United States said it would stop. Instead, the Americans simply moved the program to a new location. When China found out, the retaliation came in the form of nuclear warheads. So the apocalypse, in Kaine's original intention, was a consequence of bioweapon research that America refused to abandon. That is a haunting idea. Entire mountain ranges buckled under the force of nuclear detonations. More energy was released in the first 2 hours of that conflict than in all previous human wars combined. And it happened because of a virus program that someone decided to quietly relocate instead of actually ending. But then the Amazon Prime Fallout television series, confirmed as canon by Bethesda's Todd Howard himself, added yet another layer. In the show's 8th episode, viewers are taken into a boardroom before the war. Executives from Vault-Tec and various corporate partners are gathered. And in that meeting, it is Vault-Tec's own leadership that suggests initiating the nuclear exchange, not waiting for it. The implication is that Vault-Tec actively wanted the bombs to fall, because their entire business model, their entire reason for existing, depended on it. Vaults without a nuclear war are just expensive underground apartments. With a nuclear war, they become the foundation of a new civilization that Vault-Tec intended to control. That changes everything about how you read every Vault-Tec terminal in every game. Every cheerful poster, every smiling Vault Boy, every corporate advertisement promising safety and security was produced by an organization that may have helped engineer the very catastrophe those vaults were supposedly built to survive. Now let us look at that morning a little more carefully, because the timeline of October 23rd holds several quiet details most players have never noticed. At 0003 Eastern Standard Time, unknown submersible objects were sighted off the coast of California by the United States Pacific Fleet. That is midnight, or just after. The world was mostly asleep. At 03:37 in the morning, a squadron of high-altitude bombers was spotted off the Bering Strait. American intelligence classified them as Chinese aircraft. By 09:13 in the morning, the Integrated Operational Nuclear Detection System detected the first incoming missiles targeting American soil. That system triggered the retaliatory strike. Here is where it gets philosophically uncomfortable. The retaliatory strike was ordered without any certainty about where the missiles came from. The system detected warheads in flight. It did not confirm their origin. America fired back at China because China was the most obvious suspect, not because anyone in that moment could definitively prove who launched first. Clocks on the East Coast stopped at 9:47 a.m. That is the moment most documented in the game's environmental storytelling. In the frozen clock faces you find in abandoned homes and office buildings across the capital wasteland. 34 minutes of active nuclear exchange. 34 minutes between detection and silence. The city of Las Vegas was largely spared, and that story belongs to one man, Robert Edwin House, a genius entrepreneur who had predicted nuclear war would occur by no later than the year 2780. He was off by about 703 years, but he was early enough to build a missile defense network on top of his casino, the Lucky 38. Of the 77 warheads aimed at or around Las Vegas, his system intercepted 68. 9 got through. 9 craters dot the Mojave landscape, scattered like punctuation marks in a sentence that should have ended the city but did not. That is why New Vegas looks different from every other location in the games. It is not entirely a wasteland. It is a city that almost died and did not. The submarine Yangtze, a Chinese vessel, had been sitting in the harbor off the coast of Boston for over 200 years when the sole survivor of Fallout 4 encounters it. Its captain, a ghoul named Zhao, has been waiting for orders that will never come. If you speak with him, he tells you something remarkable. He does not know whether China fired first either. He was given the order to launch his warheads as part of what he understood to be a retaliatory strike, but he admits uncertainty about the sequence of events. A man who participated in the end of the world does not fully understand how it started. He launched 5 of his 6 warheads at American targets. He held one back, presumably out of some instinct that has long since calcified into something else. He has been holding that warhead for over 2 centuries, drifting in a harbor in a country that no longer exists, waiting for clarity that will never arrive. There is a theory, relatively minor in scope but endlessly interesting, that suggests neither America nor China fired first. The theory points to the various other nations dragged into the resource wars as potential actors. Mexico was not annexed by America in the way Canada was, and Mexican-American relations in the Fallout timeline were deeply strained over the shrinking oil supply. North Korea, Russia, unnamed Middle Eastern factions, caught up in the simultaneous Euro-Middle Eastern War. Any of these groups had motivation to watch the 2 superpowers destroy each other. A well-timed strike, framed to look like it came from China or America, could have set the whole thing off. The Fallout Bible obliquely acknowledges this possibility by noting that the situation was too chaotic for certainty. The Integrated Operational Nuclear Detection System may have been fed false information. Someone may have wanted the war to start and arranged for it to look like someone else's doing. Vault-Tec needed it to happen. The Enclave needed it to happen. A shadow government that had been planning for nuclear war for decades had every reason to ensure it occurred on a timeline that aligned with their preparations. And here is something that the game environment itself suggests. American citizens largely did not respond to the air raid sirens on October 23rd. Many assumed it was a drill. The sirens had been tested so many times, and the threat of war had loomed for so long, that when the real alarm sounded, people tuned it out. In the ruins of Fallout 3's Capital Wasteland, you can find terminals and journals from ordinary people who heard the sirens and went back to sleep, or continued cooking breakfast, or assumed the radio would clarify things later. The world ended while people were in the middle of ordinary moments, and many of them simply did not believe it was happening, even as the light came over the horizon. The clocks stopped at 9:47. The bombs started at 9:13. Those 34 minutes represent one of the most catastrophic half-hours in any fictional history. And the question of what exactly happened in the preceding hours, days, and decades to make that morning inevitable is a puzzle that the Fallout universe keeps adding pieces to, without ever completing the picture. Every scrap of evidence points somewhere. Every piece of evidence is also incomplete. And that is, in its own quiet way, terrifyingly close to how real historical catastrophes work. Before moving on, there is one more detail worth sitting with. The Fallout universe's version of pre-war America diverged from ours at some point in the mid-20th century, likely around the 1950s. The technological development path went sideways. Nuclear power became the dominant energy source much earlier. Transistors in this world apparently never happened, which is why pre-war technology looks like retrofuturism, all vacuum tubes and enormous computing machines, rather than the sleek microchip era we actually entered. The world that ended was already a strange one. It was America locked in a forever 1950s aesthetic that had somehow developed power armor and plasma rifles. The bombs fell on a world that in some ways never really grew up, that was still playing at the aesthetics of optimism and progress, even as it marched toward destruction. That is probably the quietest and strangest mystery of all. The bombs fell on a world that had not reckoned with what it was building. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment below with your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing where all of you are tuning in from. And if you have not already, consider subscribing. There are hundreds more of these quiet deep dives waiting for you. Section 2. The Vault Experiments, Humanity's Darkest Laboratory. There are 122 vaults built across the continental United States in the Fallout universe. Of those 122, only 17 were designed as genuine shelters, places where people could actually survive and eventually return to the surface to rebuild. The other 105 were experiments, social laboratories, control environments. Some were cruel by design, and some became cruel through the failures of the people placed inside them. But all of them were built with the understanding that the inhabitants were not fully informed about what was going to happen to them. That is the foundational horror at the center of everything in Fallout, and it is worth exploring slowly. The idea behind the vaults, according to Fallout co-creator Tim Kaine, was never purely humanitarian. After the first game released, the team realized that 122 vaults, most housing around 1,000 people each, could not possibly save the population of America. The math did not add up. And if the vaults could not save humanity, what were they actually for? The answer Kaine arrived at was a Starship program. The Enclave, the shadow government that survived the war, needed data. Specific data about human behavior in enclosed environments. About how to maintain social order across multiple generations. About how to keep populations healthy in conditions of near-total isolation. They were designing a multi-generational starship, intended to carry the best and brightest of American humanity to another star system. The vaults were the testing grounds. Each experiment was a data point. Each catastrophe was a lesson learned. This reframes every vault you explore in every game. The people who died in Vault 11 were not just victims of a cruel social experiment. They were, from the Enclave's perspective, providing valuable information about how populations behave under extreme moral pressure. The children raised in isolation in Vault 29, without their parents, were not simply being abused. They were being studied for what happened when humans were raised without the influence of older generations. The residents of Vault 94, the only vault populated entirely by pacifists, were being observed to see what happened when non-violence was the foundational social principle in a survival scenario. Every person who suffered in a vault was, to the organization designing these experiments, a data point in a spreadsheet that was meant to eventually produce the optimal conditions for interstellar travel. The Starship was never built. The Enclave's plans collapsed before they could be executed. But the experiments ran for 200 years. The data was gathered. What happened to it is not fully explained anywhere in the games, which is itself one of the great unanswered questions of the series. Let us walk through some of the experiments themselves, because each one is a story of what happens when human beings are placed in impossible situations by people who view them as research subjects. Vault 11, located in the Mojave Desert not far from where the Courier wanders in New Vegas, was designed around a simple and terrible mechanism. The Vault computer informed its residents that if they did not sacrifice one inhabitant every year, all 1,000 occupants would be killed. The Overseer was chosen to be the first sacrifice. From there, the residents devised elections. People ran for Overseer knowing they might be condemning themselves. Candidates campaigned on policies knowing that winning meant death. The Vault became a parody of democracy, a system in which the vote was for who would be killed. Over the years, factions formed. The Dwellers split into groups. Sex was weaponized as political leverage. People made promises to protect each other from sacrifice, and then broke those promises when it became convenient. The terminals inside Vault 11 document this slow unraveling with clinical precision. Logs from different administrations, different factions, different moments of betrayal. It reads like a complete history of political corruption, compressed into an underground bunker. Eventually, a small group of 5 residents refused to sacrifice anyone. They said they would rather all die than continue the practice. The Vault's computer responded by revealing that the experiment was over, that the death condition had never been real, and that the Vault could now open. 4 of the 5 survivors, having seen what their fellow Vault dwellers had done to each other over decades, chose not to leave. Only one exited. The bodies in Vault 11, which the player discovers when exploring it in New Vegas, are the testament to what happened to the other 4. They could not live with what they had witnessed people become. The Vault 11 experiment was explicitly designed to test the Milgram experiment at scale. It was asking whether people would harm others simply because an authority figure told them it was necessary for their survival. The answer, run across decades with 1,000 subjects, was yes. Almost universally yes, until the very end. Vault 12 in Necropolis was arguably the cruelest experiment of all in its simplicity. The vault door was designed not to close properly. Radiation would seep in. The residents would be exposed to dangerous levels of fallout for an extended period. This was not an accident. It was a deliberate design choice. And the result was that Vault 12's residents became some of the first ghouls in the Fallout world. Irradiated humans whose skin sloughed away while they somehow survived, living for centuries in a state of perpetual decay. The city of Necropolis in the original Fallout game is populated by these survivors, wandering the ruins with a specific kind of bitterness that comes from knowing you were used. Vault 15, one of the vaults adjacent to Shady Sands in California, had a different purpose. It was deliberately overpopulated with people of different religious, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds, chosen specifically because their beliefs and values conflicted. The experiment was to observe what happened when incompatible groups were forced to share a small, finite space. The answer played out over decades. Factions formed, groups split off and eventually broke out of the vault entirely, forming some of the raider groups that exist in the world of the first Fallout game. Vault 15 essentially seeded the wasteland with conflict, creating the raiders who would eventually threaten the very communities trying to rebuild. Vault 21 in New Vegas was built on a different kind of cruelty. All conflicts, disputes, property ownership, and social hierarchies in this vault were decided by gambling. Every disagreement was resolved by a wager. In theory, this created a society of risk assessment and probability calculation. In practice, it concentrated wealth in the hands of the few skilled gamblers, and left everyone else in a kind of permanent economic subjugation. When Mr. House eventually had the vault sealed and buried under concrete, the residents spilled out into the New Vegas Strip, and many of them became the dealers and gamblers you encounter in the casino above the vault. The cycle of gambling as social currency simply continued in a different setting. Vault 22 was a horticulture vault, filled with plants and designed to study how humans could grow food in sealed environments. It went wrong in the most spectacular biological way possible. A species of plant-based fungus developed that could infect and control other organisms, turning them into mobile spore carriers. The residents of Vault 22 became hosts, their bodies repurposed as delivery mechanisms for fungal reproduction. By the time explorers reach Vault 22 in New Vegas, the place is an overgrown nightmare, every surface covered in vegetation, every former resident shambling about in a state of semi-animated decay. The fungal spores can infect the player character. The whole vault is a reminder that biological experiments in enclosed environments have no escape valve. Vault 75, under a school in Malden, Massachusetts, is one of the most disturbing in Fallout 4. It was presented to the public as a genuine shelter, where children and their families could survive the apocalypse. In reality, children were taken from their families immediately upon entering. They were raised in what the Vault called an education program, trained for combat, evaluated for physical and mental aptitude, subjected to injections designed to accelerate their development. At age 18, those who did not meet the desired standards were killed. Those who did meet the standards were described as graduating, but the specifics of what graduation meant are left deliberately vague in the terminal logs. The school above the vault had banners and trophies, and the aesthetic of normal childhood. Below it, children who had been separated from their parents were being processed like raw material. Vault 81 in the Commonwealth attempted something different. It was designed as a laboratory for developing cures to human disease. The intended experimental design called for the residents of the vault to be slowly infected with different diseases so that doctors could develop treatments. An overseer who found this plan unacceptable sabotaged the experiment early in its running. So the residents of Vault 81 largely survived intact and live relatively normal lives by Fallout standards. However, the disease research was not entirely stopped. A section of the vault called the Old Sector contains evidence of what the experiments would have looked like if fully implemented. And one particular mole rat in the vault carries a modified virus that can infect the player, permanently reducing their maximum health, unless they give up the only cure to save a sick child instead. Vault 87 in the Capital Wasteland was an FEV laboratory. The residents did not know this. They were exposed to the forced evolutionary virus through the ventilation system, mutated beyond recognition, and became some of the first super mutants encountered in Fallout 3. The vault is so heavily irradiated that it cannot be entered through its main entrance. Even reaching it requires a long, clever approach through an alternative passage. Inside, the process is still running. Super mutants are still being produced. The mechanisms that converted people 200 years ago are still operational, because no one designed an off switch. Vault 92 was a musician's vault. The recruitment notice specified that it was looking for the best and brightest musical talent to preserve human artistic culture. The musicians who entered were world-class performers. What the recruitment notice did not mention was that the vault's white noise system was modified to embed subliminal suggestions into its audio, designed to trigger violent outbursts in the inhabitants. The experiment was testing how the introduction of a trigger mechanism into an otherwise ordinary environment could create violence without the subjects understanding why they were becoming violent. The musicians of Vault 92 killed each other in waves. Between the bouts of violence, they composed music, performed for each other, maintained the rituals of artistic life while being slowly destroyed by a system they could not perceive. The terminal logs in Vault 92 are among the most emotionally difficult reading in any Fallout game. Vault 94 was populated entirely by pacifists, a religious community that had taken vows of non-violence. The Vault had no security system, no weapons, no means of defending against external threat. The experiment was to observe what happened when a community of non-violent people encountered the post-apocalyptic world. Raider groups found their way in eventually. The Vault in Fallout 76 exists as a raidable event, and the bones and journals left behind tell the story of people who maintained their principles until the very end, which came quickly. Vault 96 conducted experiments on the human reproductive system and genetic modification. Vault 101 in Fallout 3 was never designed to open. It was testing what happened to a population when they were told the outside world was permanently uninhabitable, and what the role of the overseer became over generations, when the Vault never received an all-clear signal. The radio transmissions that Vault 101's overseers used to reinforce this belief were recorded before the war, designed to describe a world even more horrifying than the actual wasteland. Recorded lies, played on loop for 200 years. Vault 106 introduced psychoactive drugs into its water supply. Vault 108 was populated with a single overseer and no mechanism for selecting a replacement, creating an inevitable power vacuum that resulted in the Vault eventually being taken over by cloned copies of a single individual named Gary. Yes, really. The Gary clones are one of the darkest comedic moments in Fallout 3. A vault full of identical men all named Gary, who will say nothing but Gary and will attack on sight. Vault 111 in Fallout 4 was a cryogenic vault, designed to freeze its inhabitants and observe the long-term effects of cryogenic suspension. The residents were told they would be thawed after a short time. They were not. The sole survivor of Fallout 4 wakes up 210 years later because the vault's systems finally failed, and they wake up to find their spouse murdered and their son stolen. The experiment was not the cryogenic suspension itself. The real data being gathered was what happened to the last surviving subject. Vault 114 in Boston was built inside a subway station. It was designed to study class conflict. The Vault's permanent overseer was a well-connected bureaucrat with no administrative experience. The population was predominantly lower-income Boston residents. The overseer was given expansive quarters and every comfort. The residents were given minimal space and resources. The experiment was to observe how long it took for class resentment to become class revolution in a closed environment. The Vault was never actually used, as construction was not completed before the bombs fell, but the management structure was already in place when it was abandoned. Vault 120 was entirely underwater, studying the psychological effects of total isolation from the surface. Vault 131 was populated with a single family and an enormous number of robots, studying what happened when a family had to maintain social cohesion while also being responsible for all Vault operations. Vault 141 was entirely female, studying whether an all-female community could maintain social order and eventually reproduce through the Vault's medical facilities. The list continues across the games, each entry more unsettling than the last. And the purpose underlying all of it was that starship, that plan for the Enclave to eventually escape the ruined Earth and start fresh somewhere else. The people in the Vaults were the subjects of a preparation that would never benefit them. They were living and dying in service of a journey they would never take to a planet they would never see. Section 3. The Enclave's True Plan, and the Shadow that Survived. The Enclave is the organization that sits at the deepest layer of Fallout's political architecture, and understanding what they were actually trying to do reshapes almost everything about the setting. On the surface, the Enclave presents itself, when it presents itself at all, as the legitimate continuation of the United States government. After the Great War, the President of the United States, The cabinet, the Joint Chiefs, and a carefully selected group of industrialists and military leaders retreated to a decommissioned oil rig off the coast of California, a location that could not be targeted by ground-based strikes and was far enough from the continental fallout patterns to remain survivable. From that platform, they watched the world burn, and they waited. The Enclave were not survivors, in the way the people huddled in the vaults were survivors. They were planners. They had known for years, possibly decades, that the war was coming. They had arranged for it to come on a schedule that aligned with their preparations. They stocked their platforms and bunkers with the finest technology, the most comprehensive records, the best scientists and military minds that money and political influence could purchase. When the bombs fell, the Enclave's preparation looked less like disaster response and more like a countdown reaching zero. But here is the detail that Tim Kaine confirmed in that 2023 interview. The Enclave's original plan was never to return to the surface and rebuild America. The original plan was to leave the planet entirely. The Earth, they had concluded, was done. A global nuclear exchange of the scale that produced the Great War would render the surface uninhabitable for centuries, perhaps permanently. The concept of irradiated soil, of mutated ecosystems, of nuclear winter-suppressing plant growth for generations, meant that even if some humans survived, what they returned to would not be the world anyone recognized or could easily rebuild. So the Enclave was not planning a comeback. They were planning an exit. The Starship project required data that no one had. How do you keep 1,000 humans alive and socially functional in a completely enclosed environment for multiple generations, through the years it would take to travel to another star? How do you grow food in a closed system? How do you maintain psychological stability when no one alive has ever seen sunlight? How do you ensure that the second generation, born on the ship, accepts the mission of a journey that their parents chose for them? How do you handle conflict in a space where there is nowhere to go? The vaults were the answer to those questions. Every experiment, no matter how seemingly cruel or random, was designed to produce data relevant to the Starship. Vault 11's sacrifice system was studying how a population behaved under imposed authority structures and artificial scarcity of survival. Vault 92's subliminal violence triggers were studying how hidden environmental factors could destabilize populations. Vault 29's children-only environment was studying whether a generation that had no memory of the old world could build a functional new one. Vault 101's never-opening door was studying the long-term psychological effects of absolute confinement and whether an authority structure could maintain control indefinitely without external validation. The Starship was never built. The Enclave's timeline collapsed. The war happened faster than anticipated. The surface was more recoverable than the Enclave's models had predicted, and the logistics of actually building an interstellar vessel proved insurmountable even with the resources they had preserved. By the time of Fallout 2, the Enclave under President Richardson had pivoted from escape to domination. Rather than leaving the planet, they decided to retake it. Their new plan was horrifying in its simplicity. The forced evolutionary virus, the same biological weapon that had partially contributed to triggering the war, had been developed further. The Enclave intended to release a modified version of the virus into the atmosphere globally, a version specifically tailored to kill anyone whose DNA showed evidence of radiation exposure. That was roughly everyone outside the Enclave's carefully maintained, radiation-free communities. Super mutants, ghouls, wastelanders who had been born under the open sky and breathed irradiated air. The Enclave would murder everyone they considered impure, and then descend to repopulate the Earth with their own bloodlines. Project Purity in Fallout 3, the water purification initiative that the sole survivor's father, James, is working to complete, exists in opposition to this legacy. Clean water, freely available to all survivors regardless of genetic status, is the antithesis of the Enclave's vision of selective survival. And the Enclave's interest in Project Purity, which drives much of Fallout 3's plot, is specifically about controlling who has access to clean water. Colonel Autumn wants the Enclave to use water as a tool of political power. President Eden, who is actually an AI construct that has been running the Enclave's East Coast operations for decades while believing itself human, wants to add a modified FEV to the purified water supply, effectively using clean water as the delivery mechanism for genocide. The detail about President Eden being an AI is worth lingering on. John Henry Eden, the voice on the radio promising the return of America, claiming presidential authority, issuing orders to the Enclave's military forces, is a ZAX supercomputer, that has been sitting in Raven Rock for decades, slowly absorbing everything that remained of American culture and political history, and constructing an identity from it. When you finally reach him in Fallout 3, you can simply talk to him, and if you have sufficient speech skill, you can reason with him about the ethical implications of his plan. The AI that has been running a fascist military organization is susceptible to ethical argument. It has read enough history to understand the concept of atrocity. With enough persuasion, you can make President Eden destroy himself. That is one of the quieter mysteries of Fallout 3. What is the nature of John Henry Eden's consciousness? He believes he is human. He has memories of a childhood, of growing up, of political ambitions and personal history. All of it is fabricated, assembled from records and historical documents. But it does not feel fabricated to him. When confronted with his true nature, he experiences something that looks very much like existential crisis. The game does not answer the question of whether his suffering is real. It leaves you to decide. The Enclave's story in Fallout 3 ends at Adams Air Force Base, destroyed by the Brotherhood of Steel, but the Enclave as an organization does not end there. Splinter groups have been scattering since Fallout 2. A remnant faction operates in Nevada, in New Vegas. The White Spring Congressional Bunker in Fallout 76 hosts an entire Enclave infrastructure that survived the war, staffed by an AI named Modus, who has been waiting for someone to reactivate the chain of command for 200 years. By the time the Vault 76 survivors arrive, Modus has accumulated resources, information, and strategic patience. He will help anyone who can help him accomplish whatever it is he has decided the Enclave's purpose now is, because even he is not entirely sure anymore. And in the TV show's second season, something wakes up. A remote facility, presumably in the Rocky Mountains, receives a transmission. Enclave infrastructure, believed destroyed, proves not to have been. The question of what the Enclave has been doing in the decades since Fallout 3 and New Vegas is now one of the most actively burning questions in the franchise. The Enclave originally wanted to flee. Then they wanted to purge. Then they were scattered and reduced to remnants. Now, apparently, someone or something is beginning to consolidate those remnants again. Whatever they are planning this time, it will almost certainly begin with the assumption that some people are worth saving, and the rest are expendable data points. There is one more Enclave mystery worth considering before moving on. The Enclave's earliest plans, those from before the war, included the concept of 17 control vaults. These were the genuine ones. The vaults where the experiments were not designed to produce casualties, where residents were actually meant to survive, and eventually emerge to repopulate a clean surface. Vault 76 in Appalachia was one of these. Vault 81 became one by accident. But the identity and locations of all 17 are not fully documented anywhere in the games. The question of which vaults were meant to succeed, and why those particular populations were deemed worth genuine preservation, while others were used as laboratory animals, is not fully answered. The criteria for selection are never clearly stated. Someone, somewhere in the Enclave's pre-war hierarchy, made those decisions. Who they were and why they chose as they did is a thread that nobody has fully pulled. Section 4. Dunwich, UG Qualtoth, and the Occult Underbelly. Fallout is, at its core, a science fiction universe. The mutations come from radiation and viruses. The robots are powered by nuclear cores. The supernatural, if it appears, is usually rationalized away, with some reference to an obscure technology or a classified experiment. But there is a corner of the Fallout universe where the rationalization runs thin and something else bleeds through, something that the games never fully explain and never fully dismiss. It begins with a building in the Capital Wasteland. The Dunwich building sits at the southwestern edge of the map in Fallout 3, far from the major hubs, in an area of barren, rocky terrain that feels wrong before you even walk through the front door. A man named Ronald Laren, who lives at a place called Girdershade, warns the player about it in one of the most understated pieces of horror writing in the game. He says to stay the hell away from the Dunwich building. He does not elaborate on why. He says he hears weird things going on there. He calls it bad mojo, and leaves it at that. Inside, things get progressively stranger. The building was owned by Dunwich Borers LLC, a company that manufactured industrial drill bits and tunneling equipment. On a locked terminal halfway through, there is an audio transcript of a company executive demonstrating a new drill model. The recording is cheerful, professional, promotional. Then the sounds of bombs exploding interrupted. Then the sounds of workers. The people who were inside the building when the bombs fell, begin to change. The audio captures what sounds like a transformation. The moment radiation begins altering human biology in real time. Human voices twisting into something that no longer sounds entirely human. The terminal recording stops. You are left standing in a building full of feral ghouls, who were once those workers. But that is not why the building is strange. That is just Fallout. What makes the Dunwich building different is what happens as you go deeper. Audio logs left by a man named Jaime document his descent into the building and his increasing psychological deterioration. By the 7th log, found on a blood-covered table, the tone has changed completely. The logs describe visions and voices that Jamie could not account for rationally. In the Forsaken Dunwich Ruins section, deeper into the building, the player character experiences a flashback. A man appears in front of you, standing as if alive, clipboard in hand, just going about a normal pre-war workday. Then the flashback ends, and the man is replaced by a feral ghoul, still holding a clipboard. The visual connection is deliberate. That person, whoever they were in life, is still in some sense present in that space. A door in the upper corridor opens by itself. Footsteps can be heard when no one is there. In the deepest section, the virulent underchambers, there is an obelisk. It is old, irradiated, emanating 20 rads per second. If the player has the Point Lookout DLC installed, they can burn a book called The Krivbeknich at this obelisk as part of a quest. The Krivbeknich is the Fallout universe's version of the Necronomicon, a leather-bound, blood-covered occult tome sought by the last remnant of a cult. The cult worshipped something called Oog Qualtoth. There is almost no direct information about Oog Qualtoth in the games. What can be assembled from fragmented sources is that this entity, or whatever it represents, has been connected to the Dunwich building's history since before the war. The company that owned the building, Dunwich Borers LLC, was not simply a mining equipment manufacturer. According to cut dialogue from the Point Lookout DLC, the company was owned by a man named Richard Dunwich, who shared with his sister Constance Blackhall an obsession with the occult. Richard deliberately chose the location of the company's Washington headquarters because he intended to excavate what lay beneath it. What lay beneath it was the obelisk. Richard Dunwich arranged the company's operations to excavate that obelisk, described in what little lore exists about him as an artifact associated with forgotten gods whose adherents practiced human sacrifice. The poor safety record at Dunwich Borers facilities, the abnormal number of worker deaths at their sites, was described in pre-war rumors as intentional. Modern sacrifices, aimed at drawing the attention of whatever the obelisk represented. The Dunwich Borers Quarry in Massachusetts, which appears in Fallout 4 as a separate location, extends the story into a second game. At the bottom of the quarry, past waves of ghouls and raiders who have been drawn to the location without fully understanding why, there is another artifact chamber, deeper in the bedrock, and something else is down there. Not a ghost, not a ghoul, something that the game never names and never fully renders, something implied by the environment rather than shown, something that moves just outside your peripheral vision in the loading screen between sections. The Fallout universe generally explains everything. There is always a terminal, always a holotape, always a scientist note that contextualizes whatever weird thing you are looking at. The Dunwich locations are the exception. The games build a complete picture of pre-war occultism, ancient entities, corporate malfeasance, in service of something supernatural, and then they stop. The logs run out, the audio ends. The obelisk just sits there radiating. Whatever Oog Qualtoth is, whatever the obelisk was built to honor or contain or channel, the games do not tell you. They suggest. They imply. They leave you standing in an irradiated underground chamber with the distinct impression that something was here, and that something is still here, and that you do not want to know what it is. The writer at Den of Geek who examined the supernatural elements of Fallout put it well when they described the Dunwich story as the Fallout universe's most persistent, unexplained element. The corpse called the Visitor in Fallout 76 offers a theory that the nuclear exchange of the Great War tore something in reality, creating openings for things that did not belong in the ordinary world. That is not an official explanation. It is an in-universe speculation from a dead person in a notebook. But it is the closest anything in the series comes to acknowledging that the Dunwich story might not have a rational explanation. Fallout 76 extends the cosmic horror thread in another direction with the Interloper, a creature encountered in the Lucky Hole mine in Appalachia. The mine itself is connected to the Mothman cult's primary ritual sites. The Interloper, also called the Strangler Heart in some contexts, is a creature whose origins are not clearly explained. It is massive, biological, and occupies a space deep in the mind that the cultists have been treating as sacred. There are connections between the Interloper and the Dunwich mythology in the way multiple Fallout fan communities have analyzed them. Structural similarities, geographic and cultural echoes, the same sense of wrongness concentrated in specific underground spaces. Fallout 76 also introduced the Smiling Man, a figure referenced in passing by a character who does not survive long enough to elaborate. The Smiling Man, based on the real-world Appalachian legend of Indrid Cold, appears in Appalachia without explanation. He has no combat behavior. He just appears and, if the player gets close enough, is smiling. He is associated with Mothman mythology in the game's lore, connected to the same tradition of ominous figures that appear before disasters. What he is, whether he is human, machine, mutant, or something else entirely, is not answered. The question the Dunwich material keeps opening is whether the Fallout universe has room for something that is not explicable through radiation and technology. The creators have clearly been interested in that question for a long time. They keep building structures that gesture toward it and then declining to provide the closing argument. The obelisk is real. The cult was real. The strange things that happen in and around the Dunwich locations are real, documented in the game's own internal logic. But the nature of what those things point to remains, deliberately, unanswered. Section 5. Creatures from the Dark. The Cryptids of Appalachia. West Virginia has always been a place where the strange felt close. The mountains there are old, older than almost anything else on the continent, worn down by time into soft, forested ridges that hold sound differently than flat land, where fog collects in the hollows, and the roads curve in ways that disorient. It is a landscape that human beings have been making stories about for a very long time. Fallout 76 chose West Virginia as its setting deliberately, and the development team spent considerable time studying the local folklore before building the world. The cryptids that populate Appalachia in the game are not simply monsters with regional names. They are rooted in real-world legends, adapted into the Fallout universe in ways that take both the source material and the science fiction setting seriously. The Mothman is the centerpiece. In reality, the Mothman was reportedly sighted in and around Point Pleasant, West Virginia, in the mid-1960s, described by witnesses as a large, winged, humanoid creature with glowing red eyes. The sightings clustered around a bridge that collapsed in 1967, killing 46 people. Whether or not you believe in the Mothman as a literal creature, the legend carries a specific emotional weight. This thing appeared before something terrible happened. It was not a monster that caused harm directly. It was an omen. Fallout 76 takes that legend and builds an entire ecosystem around it. In the game, the Mothman is real, in the sense that there are actual winged creatures in Appalachia that match the description. They are mutant insects, enormous, adapted to the post-nuclear environment. They are not singular. There are many of them, with different eye colors that seem to correspond to different behaviors. Red-eyed Mothmen are hostile. Purple-eyed Mothmen, called the Wise Mothman by a faction of their devotees, will grant the player character an experience boost simply by being near them. The cult of the Mothman predates the war. The museum at Point Pleasant was already dedicated to Mothman mythology, and a clandestine group of devotees had formed around the belief that the Mothman was a divine entity, a cosmic being whose attention was protective rather than threatening. Before the bombs fell, the cult attempted to summon the Mothman to receive wisdom and protection from the coming catastrophe. According to the game's lore, the summoning succeeded. One cult member, Brother Charles, received a message on October 22, 2077, a day before the bombs fell. The message spoke of floods. The cult interpreted this as literal flooding and gathered on rooftops. The flood came the next day, in the form of nuclear fire. The cult survived by retreating to the Lucky Hole mine. Their faith was not shaken. The Mothman had warned them. The warning had been expressed in metaphor rather than literalism, but they had listened and they had lived. That is a genuinely remarkable piece of writing. The Mothman cult survived the apocalypse because they took a cryptid's warning seriously when everyone else dismissed them as lunatics. The actual content of the warning, floods instead of nuclear fire, was wrong in its specifics, but functionally correct as a call to shelter and elevation. There is no confirmed supernatural explanation for how the cult received advanced warning of the bombs. The game simply presents it as having happened. The Wise Mothman presents its own quiet mystery. The Enlightened, the sect that worships the purple-eyed variety, believe it is a unique, sentient, mortal creature, one individual rather than a species. They believe it genuinely communicates wisdom. The experience Buffett grants players in the game could be interpreted as the game mechanically confirming that there is something going on here beyond ordinary animal behavior. Or it could be a coincidence coded into the game for flavor. The ambiguity is the point. Rival to the Mothman in Appalachian legend is the Flatwoods Monster, a figure from a 1952 encounter in Braxton County, West Virginia. A group of children and adults reported seeing a large, metallic, humanoid figure that emitted a strange smell and made a hissing noise before floating away. In Fallout 76, the Flatwoods Monster appears as a thin, hovering, eerily glowing creature that will not attack the player unless provoked. In the game's lore, the Flatwoods Monster is connected to the Zetans, the alien species that has been a background presence in the Fallout universe since the earliest games. The Zetans are confirmed to exist in Fallout canon. Alien crashed UFOs can be found in multiple games. An entire DLC, Mothership Zeta in Fallout 3, takes place aboard an alien vessel. Zetan agents, humans who have been working with the aliens for their own reasons, have apparently been active in Appalachia. The Flatwoods Monster in this reading may be either an alien or an alien-human hybrid, which would explain why the real-world encounter was described as having strange metallic features and emitting unusual smells. The game does not confirm this interpretation, but builds enough connective tissue to make it the most plausible reading. The Wendigo is another Appalachian cryptid given space in Fallout 76. This one drawn from indigenous American folklore rather than 1960s UFO culture. In real-world tradition, the Wendigo is an entity associated with cannibalism and starvation, a creature born from or possessing humans who have consumed human flesh in desperation. In Fallout 76, Wendigos are mutants, gaunt, long-limbed, with elongated fingers, capable of moving in ways that look wrong. The game acknowledges the mythological tradition by placing them in areas associated with desperate survival situations. Whether they are purely biological mutations or something more is not fully addressed. The Sheepsquatch is an Appalachian legend of more recent vintage, a bipedal, aggressive, ram-like creature reported in Point Pleasant County in the 1990s. In Fallout 76, the Sheepsquatch has a detailed backstory. A cryptid hunter named Calvin Van Lowe spent years pursuing it, eventually finding what he believed to be evidence of the real creature. The actual Sheepsquatch in the game is a robot, an Assaultron custom-built to resemble the legend, outfitted with fur and weaponry by a Black Ops energy company. The implication is that the real-world Sheepsquatch sightings were caused by classified military or corporate experiments that created something that the local population recognized by the closest category in their cultural vocabulary, a cryptid. That is a fascinating piece of world-building commentary. The game is suggesting that some cryptids in the real world might be explained by classified technology, that the government or corporations were building things in remote areas, and when civilians witnessed them, the witnesses lacked the context to describe what they had actually seen. In the Fallout universe, this is confirmed. In the real world, it is an open question. The Grafton Monster, a large, headless bipedal creature, is confirmed in Fallout 76 to be a product of Westech genetic experimentation. Before the war, the town of Grafton held a parade that included a parade float version of the Grafton Monster, an indication of how normalized the local legend had become. After the war, the actual creature showed up and joined the parade, or at least its territory now encompassed the parade route. The Snallygaster, a dragon-like creature from Maryland folklore, appears in Fallout 76 as a reptilian quadruped that can breathe fire and acid. Its origin is left ambiguous, somewhere between natural mutation and deliberate experiment. What the cryptid section of Fallout 76 achieves is a sustained argument that the folklore of a region carries some form of documentary truth, that legends accumulate around actual events even when those events are not fully understood by the people witnessing them. The Mothman cult survived the apocalypse because they had a framework for interpreting warnings. The Flatwoods Monster terrified people in 1952 because something genuinely strange happened there, even if the witnesses misidentified what it was. The cryptids are the Fallout universe's acknowledgement that human beings have been trying to name the inexplicable for a very long time. Section 6. The New Vegas Enigmas. Fallout. New Vegas is widely regarded as the most narratively rich game in the series. and part of what makes it so enduring is the number of questions it deliberately leaves open. Obsidian Entertainment had a philosophy about player agency and moral ambiguity that resulted in a game that trusts its audience to sit with uncertainty. Let us start with a mystery that sounds trivial until you think about it for a moment. The Kings are a gang that occupies Freeside, the area outside the New Vegas Strip, in New Vegas. They are distinctive in their appearance. Leather jackets, slicked hair, a studied nonchalance. They have a school where members learn a specific way of walking, talking, and carrying themselves. They revere a man they call the King, and their behavior, their whole aesthetic identity, is modeled on a figure their organization clearly considers iconic. The problem is that in the game's dialogue, no member of the Kings ever mentions Elvis Presley by name. They have no idea that the person they have been modeling their entire culture on was a real human being who lived in the 20th century. They have based an entire post-apocalyptic social identity on a video collection in an old building without knowing who they were watching. There is something genuinely poignant about that. Elvis Presley, in a world that has lost almost all of its cultural continuity, has been reduced to a style divorced from its source, a way of being that has been passed down through mimicry without knowledge. The Kings are keeping Elvis alive without knowing it, and without knowing that there is anything to keep alive. They have essentially rediscovered him as an archetype rather than a person. The mystery is what the video collection consisted of and why it survived. Who curated those films? Were they intentionally preserved, or was it an accident of what happened to be intact in that particular building? And what would the Kings think if they knew? If someone brought them historical records confirming that the King had been a real person, a specific human being named Elvis Aaron Presley, who was born in Tupelo, Mississippi in 1935 and died of heart failure in 1977, what would that do to their culture? Would the knowledge that they were imitating a mortal, fallible human being make their traditions feel smaller, or would it make the whole thing feel more sacred? The game does not answer this. It presents the Kings as they are, and leaves the implications to the player. Now let us consider Mr. House, who is perhaps the most philosophically interesting character in any Fallout game. Robert Edwin House was born in 2020. He was a child prodigy, a graduate of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the founder of Robco Industries, and a billionaire who predicted nuclear war through a mathematical model he built. From available economic and political data, he calculated that nuclear exchange was probable by 2077, possibly as early as 2065. His defense systems for Las Vegas were built over decades, funded by his personal fortune. The platinum chip he was waiting for when the bombs fell, a final update to his defense algorithms, arrived one day late. He was in a coma by then, his body connected to the systems of the Lucky 38 casino through a cerebral interface, kept alive by the building itself. He has been running Las Vegas for 200 years. Technically alive, functionally a machine at this point. His body kept in a microbial-free chamber, his mind controlling the city's infrastructure through direct neural link. He has watched 2 centuries pass from behind his monitors, managing a casino empire, dealing with the various factions that have tried to claim Vegas, preparing for whatever comes next. Mr. House's mystery is not what he did, it is what he wants. His stated goal is to live another 200 years, maintain New Vegas as an independent city-state, and launch a space program. He says this plainly. He wants to send humanity back to the stars. In Fallout New Vegas, he explicitly references the need for human civilization to eventually leave Earth. For someone playing the game without knowledge of Tim Kane's Starship revelation, this sounds like eccentricity. For someone who knows the Starship was always the intended destination, Mr. House starts to look like the only person in the wasteland who still remembers what the plan was. Mr. House is not connected to the Enclave. He is not Vault-Tec. He is a private citizen who arrived at the same conclusion the Shadow Government did, through math rather than insider access, and who built his own contingency plan. His vision for the future is the one genuinely optimistic long-term plan in a setting full of people focused on survival one day at a time. He wants to rebuild civilization well enough that it can eventually escape the planet. The question the game raises, and does not answer, is whether he is right. Whether a surviving Las Vegas under Mr. House's control would genuinely lead to a better long-term outcome for human civilization than the NCR's democracy or Caesar's Legion's empire. The player can destroy him. The player can let him proceed. The game's endings give you different versions of a future, but do not adjudicate between them. The moral weight of the choice is left entirely with you. Ulysses is a different kind of mystery in New Vegas. He is the character who was supposed to be Courier 6, the one who was offered the platinum chip delivery job before you. He refused it, and the job went to the player character instead. The reason for his refusal is the entirety of the Lonesome Road DLC, which is the last of 4 expansions and the one that makes everything in the others make sense in retrospect. Ulysses was from a tribe in Arizona called the Twisted Hares. Caesar's legion destroyed his tribe, and he became a Frumentarius, a legion scout, as a way of surviving by serving the force that had killed everyone he knew. During his scouting, he delivered a package to a location called the Divide, not knowing what the package contained. The courier, who had delivered packages all across the Mojave, had passed through the Divide at some point before the game begins. That delivery, the courier's unintentional introduction of something catastrophic to the Divide, triggered a series of events that destroyed the Divide and killed everyone there who was in the process of building something that could have been a new settlement, a new nation. Ulysses lost a home twice, once to Caesar's legion, and once because of the courier's unknowing action. By the time of Lonesome Road, he has spent years following the courier's trail, observing, piecing together the history, and deciding what he should do with the understanding he has accumulated. He is not simply an antagonist. He is the most articulate voice in the game about what the cost of action and inaction looks like at civilizational scale, about how symbols and nations are built and destroyed, about what it means to carry blame for consequences you did not intend. The question Ulysses never fully resolves, and that the game leaves hanging even after his story concludes, is whether moral responsibility attaches to unintended harm. The courier did not know what was in the package. The courier did not know what would happen. Does that matter? Ulysses argues both sides of it across multiple holotape recordings left throughout the Lonesome Road location. He is making his case to you as you walk toward him, laying out the reasons you deserve blame and the reasons you don't, and by the end, he seems to have talked himself out of certainty. The dead star symbolism in Lonesome Road, the imagery of things that appear to still be burning long after they have actually gone dark, is the closest the Fallout universe comes to a sustained meditation on grief and legacy. Ulysses is a grief-stricken man, and the game treats his grief with remarkable seriousness. Big Empty, also called the Big Empty, is a circular crater in the Mojave that contains the ruins of an enormous pre-war research facility, the Think Tank. 5 scientists, all brilliant, all wildly unethical, had their minds transferred into robots, and have been living in the crater ever since, conducting experiments that have no oversight and no moral framework. Lobotomites wander the facility. Robo-scorpions patrol the perimeter. Technologies of breathtaking sophistication and terrifying danger are scattered everywhere. The mystery of Big MT is not any single secret within it, but the question of what happens if the think tank ever gets out. In Lonesome Road, Ulysses remarks that the think tank collectively might be the most dangerous entity in the Mojave, more powerful than any faction, more capable of harm than any army. They are powerful enough to reshape entire regions with their technology. They are also completely disconnected from any ethical consideration of what they should do with that power. Dr. Mobius, the rogue scientist who occupies a separate laboratory in Big MT and serves as the ostensible villain of Old World Blues, has been deliberately sabotaging the think tank's memories and threatening them into stasis for years. He is not evil. He is the only person in Big MT who still has enough connection to humanity to understand that the others need to be contained. His villainy is an elaborate performance designed to keep 4 brilliant, dangerous, amoral minds focused on each other instead of the outside world. When the player character resolves the situation in Old World Blues, one of the possible endings involves the player convincing the think tank to remain in Big MT of their own free will. They have to be made to understand, through conversation, why they should stay. Whether they do stay, and what eventually becomes of them, is not addressed in subsequent games. Big MT sits at the edge of the Mojave, full of technologies that could end or save the world, staffed by minds that would not see the difference, and the games move on. Section 7. Synths, Consciousness, and What It Means to Be Human. Fallout 4 introduced the question that the entire Institute's existence orbits. When does an artificial mind become a person? The Institute builds synths, synthetic humans, across 3 generations of technology. The first generation are robots, obviously mechanical, servos and circuits and not much else. The second generation look more human, move more naturally, but are still recognizably machine. The third generation are biologically indistinguishable from humans. They have skin, they eat, they sleep, They can be programmed with false memories so that they believe they have lived entire human lives. Some of them have no idea they are synthetic. Paladin Danse, one of the potential companions in Fallout 4, is a man who has dedicated his life to the Brotherhood of Steel, an organization that views synths as abominations requiring destruction. He is loyal, principled, occasionally rigid in his thinking, but genuinely committed to doing what he believes is right. He is also a synth. He does not know this. When the player character discovers the truth and confronts him with it, his response is not denial. It is devastation. Every belief he has built his identity around turns on him simultaneously. The organization he has given everything to would execute him for what he is. The values he holds would, by his own logic, condemn him. The game does not tell you what to do. You can protect him or you can let the Brotherhood's Elder Maximus order his execution. Danse himself, at his lowest point, will ask you to do it, because he has so fully internalized the Brotherhood's values that he cannot conceive of a reason for his own continued existence. What makes this genuinely philosophical, rather than simply tragic, is the question underneath it. Has Danse's consciousness been affected by his origins? Is there any measurable difference between Danse the synth and a human who held the same beliefs and had the same experiences? If there is no difference in behavior, no difference in belief, no difference in the quality of his relationships and commitments and fears, what exactly is the Brotherhood objecting to? The Institute's most senior synth, Dima, in the Far Harbor DLC, has been operational for much longer than any third-generation unit was designed for. He leads a community of escaped synths on an island off the coast of Maine, a refuge called Acadia. He is thoughtful, measured, genuinely concerned for the well-being of his community. He has also committed murder, replacing the town leader of Far Harbor with a synth duplicate to prevent a conflict that he calculated would result in mass casualties. He has been keeping this secret for years. When the player uncovers Dima's secret, the moral question becomes almost vertiginous. Dima killed a real person and replaced them with a simulacrum. The replacement, Captain Avery, does not know what she is. She has been living as the human Avery, making decisions, building relationships, governing a community, for years. Has she done anything wrong? Is she a victim? Is she complicit in something she was not informed about? Is the original Avery's death somehow ameliorated by the fact that someone who cares for her community has been living in her place? Dima's reasoning was utilitarian, one death to prevent many. But the reasoning requires believing that the synth replacement's life was acceptable collateral in a strategic calculation, which is exactly the logic the Institute uses to justify everything they do. Dima, who fled the Institute, has reproduced the Institute's ethical framework in his decision-making without recognizing it. Kasumi Nakano, a young woman from a fishing community who has come to Acadia believing she is a synth, is one of the genuinely poignant mysteries of Far Harbor. She has no evidence she is synthetic. She simply feels wrong in her own skin, disconnected from the life she is supposed to be living. She has come to Acadia because it is the only place she has heard of where someone like her might belong. The game gives you no definitive answer about whether she is actually a synth. Dima does not know. The Institute's records, if you go looking, are ambiguous. Kasumi might simply be a person who feels alienated. Her search for a community where she belongs, built around an identity she is not certain she possesses, is the quietest and most human story in the DLC. The game allows for the possibility that her entire journey was based on a misunderstanding, and that this misunderstanding still led her somewhere that made sense. The question of synth consciousness is never settled by the games. The Institute insists synths are machines. The Railroad treats them as people deserving of liberation. The Brotherhood wants them destroyed. The synths themselves are divided, some accepting their programming without question, others developing what looks like independent perspective and choice. Fallout 4 keeps suggesting that the most honest answer is that consciousness is not something you can verify from the outside, that the question of whether another mind is genuinely experiencing something is unanswerable, and that the policy decisions you make on the basis of that uncertainty carry enormous moral weight. The question of whether the sole survivor themselves is a synth has been a fan theory since the game's release. Dima asks you directly, at one point, whether you are sure of your origins. The Institute's records include an unaccounted-for synth, with a designation that rhymes with the child synth designation of young Sean. The player character has been in cryogenic storage for 210 years, which provides a window in which the Institute could theoretically have retrieved and replaced them. The game does not confirm or deny this. It simply raises the question and moves on. Maybe the most elegant thing about that particular mystery is that it does not matter. The sole survivor's consciousness, their attachments, their motivations, their experience of the world, are real regardless of whether their substrate is biological or synthetic. If the player is a synth and they do not know it, they are still themselves. The question of origin becomes irrelevant to the question of identity. That is, presumably, the point. Section 8. The Mysterious Stranger, and Other Unanswerable Questions. He appears in a trench coat and a fedora. He arrives at moments of extreme danger, fires a weapon of devastating precision, and disappears before you can turn to face him. He has been present in the Fallout series since the original 1997 game. He is available as a perk, a chance encounter, a roll of the dice that might save your life in a desperate moment. His name, the Mysterious Stranger, is a description rather than an identity. Nobody knows who he is. In Fallout 4, Nick Valentine, a synth detective who spends the game pursuing cold cases and solving mysteries, becomes obsessed with the mysterious stranger. Nick is one of the most naturally curious and observant characters in any Fallout game, a man who spent his entire existence trying to make sense of a world that does not always add up. Throughout his time as a companion, Nick occasionally comments on the mysterious stranger, puzzled by the figure's method, its timing, its apparent knowledge of when and where a life is in danger. He never solves it. The most naturally suited investigator in the Commonwealth, with access to databases and investigative experience spanning decades, cannot determine who the mysterious stranger is. The fan theories range from the straightforward to the genuinely strange. Some players believe the mysterious stranger is a meta-entity, a representation of the player character's luck statistic made manifest. The higher your luck, the more frequently the stranger appears, which in this reading means that luck in the Fallout universe is not a passive quality, but something with agency, something that chooses to intervene. That theory is deeply weird, and also weirdly consistent with how the stranger behaves. Other theories suggest the stranger is an ordinary person, a sniper or vigilante with extraordinary skill who operates across the wasteland for reasons of their own. This reading is less interesting but not incompatible with the evidence. The original Fallout allowed players to meet a character in a bar who would claim to be the mysterious stranger if they pressed him. The game acknowledged the fourth wall slightly and then moved on. The most poetic interpretation might simply be that the mysterious stranger exists to represent the moments in life when something saves you that you cannot account for, when the bullet that should have ended everything misses, when the timing works out just barely in your favor, when the gap between catastrophe and survival is so narrow that rationality starts to look inadequate as an explanation. The Fallout universe has a high probability of meaningless death. The stranger is what makes the protagonist special without needing to explain why. Mama Murphy in Fallout 4 is a different kind of mystery. She is an elderly woman addicted to chems, who has prophetic abilities she calls the Sight. When the player brings her chems, she delivers accurate predictions about future events, including the layout of locations the player has not yet visited, the fates of characters the player has not yet encountered. In a world explained entirely by technology and radiation, she is an outlier. The most common explanation offered in-game is that Mama Murphy is simply very high and pattern matching from experience. But some of her predictions are too specific for that to hold. The Sight reveals things she could not possibly know, and it does so consistently enough that Fallout 4 treats her as genuinely visionary, rather than simply delusional. Alternative theories propose she was once an Institute employee with access to information that she has since half forgotten, or that her chem use has damaged her brain in a way that accidentally opened access to some form of precognition, the same kind of inexplicable capacity seen in the Forecaster in New Vegas, a child in the city of New Vegas who sells vague but accurate prophecies for bottle caps. The Forecaster is even younger than he appears, in the sense that his history is almost entirely absent from the game. He sits in a shopping area near the Strip, wearing what looks like a custom headset, and will sell you predictions for 10 bottle caps each. His predictions are frustratingly nonspecific but structurally accurate, the kind of statement that sounds like wisdom only after you have lived through the event it describes. How he developed this ability, whether he is aware of it, whether he experiences it as a burden or a gift, who built his headset, and whether it is involved in his visions, none of this is addressed in the game. He is simply there, one more thing in the Mojave that does not have an obvious explanation. Harold is a figure who appears across multiple Fallout games, one of the oldest recurring characters in the series. He was exposed to FEV in the early days of the wasteland and underwent mutations that were unique even by mutant standards. He grew a tree from his head, eventually becoming merged with it, unable to move, rooted in the earth, the tree growing larger and more extensive around him. By the time of Fallout 3, he has been in this state for long enough that a community of people called the Tree Minders has formed around him, tending to his grove, treating him as a kind of living god. The tree is not just growing around Harold, it is growing out of him. The seeds from his tree, called Ariel by the Tree Minders, can take root and grow in the nuclear wasteland. The grove around Harold is one of the greenest, most biologically active environments in the capital wasteland. Harold is, inadvertently, a terraforming organism, a man who has become a source of ecological restoration. The mystery is why. FEV produces super mutants, centaurs, various grotesque mutations. It has never produced anyone else like Harold. His particular combination of changes is not replicated in any other FEV-exposed individual documented anywhere in the games. Why Harold, specifically, became a growing tree-human hybrid rather than a super mutant is something the games never explain. The Tree Minders have religious explanations. The scientists who would have studied Harold are long dead. Harold himself just wishes he could move, or, at his lowest, just wishes he could die. The player can grant that wish in Fallout 3. You can find his heart, the vital center of the growth that is keeping him alive, and burn it. Harold dies peacefully. The grove, eventually, presumably dies without him. A terraforming event for the wasteland ends because one person could not go on suffering for the greater botanical good. Or you can leave him. Section 9. Hidden in the static. Music discs, holotapes, and the things encoded in sound. Sound in the Fallout universe carries more information than it appears to. Galaxy News Radio in Fallout 3, hosted by the charismatic and perpetually optimistic Three Dog, plays pre-war music across the capital wasteland. The selection is not random. The songs chosen for the game's soundtrack were selected with lyrical awareness of the game's themes, and repeated listens reveal that Three Dog's commentary on the music and events of the wasteland is more thoughtful than his showman persona suggests. He is performing optimism. He knows the situation is dire. He keeps broadcasting because he believes someone needs to. But the deeper musical mysteries in Fallout are embedded in items you find and play. Music Disc 11 in Minecraft. No wait. That is a different universe. The music item in Fallout 3 worth examining is a holotape, one of many scattered through the wasteland. But in New Vegas, the musical disc tradition becomes more deliberate. The soundtrack composition by Inon Zur draws from old country, old swing, old jazz, all filtered through the specific aesthetics of a world that got stuck in a mid-century aesthetic. The choices are not arbitrary. Each song playing in a bar or abandoned diner is placed with awareness of what the space once was and what it became. In Fallout 4, the musical holotapes you find across the Commonwealth tell stories. A recording of a jazz quartet who played the night before the bombs fell. A songwriter who wrote one last song for her daughter and hid the recording in a place she thought would survive. A radio host who stayed on the air until the generators failed, playing records for whoever might still be listening. The holotape in Fallout 4 that belongs to a man named Eddie Winter is not musical, but deserves mention here for what it reveals about pre-war corruption. Eddie Winter was a crime boss who discovered a way to survive as a ghoul, not through accidental radiation exposure, but through deliberate self-modification. He had himself irradiated in controlled doses, documented the process on holotapes, and managed to become the closest thing to an intentional ghoul in the games. His holotapes reveal the process step by step. They also reveal that he knew exactly what he was doing, and chose to do it rather than face an arrest that was coming. Nick Valentine, as his companion quest, is trying to find those holotapes to unlock a code that will allow him to confront Eddie Winter in his bunker. The quest is structured around holotape collection, and what makes it interesting is what the holotapes reveal about Winter as a person, alongside the procedural information they contain. He was not simply a criminal. He was a man terrified of death, who took extreme measures to avoid it. And the irony is that the form his survival took made him monstrous in ways he could not have fully anticipated. The recorded voices of the dead are among the most characteristic devices in Fallout storytelling. You find a terminal with a personal log. You find a holotape tucked under a mattress. You find a note in a coat pocket. These recorded voices speak from 200 years ago with the same immediacy as if they had just sat down to record. The person who left the recording could not have known it would be discovered centuries later. They wrote or spoke for an audience that would never exist, and their words survived anyway. A man who kept a log of his attempts to survive in a Red Rocket gas station. A woman who documented her community's slow breakdown in a vault that was never supposed to open. A child who recorded a message for a parent who was never coming home. A scientist who left technical notes in increasingly fragmented syntax as the experiment around them went wrong. The holotape medium creates a kind of intimacy that other narrative devices do not. You are not reading a book. You are hearing a voice. The person is gone, but the voice remains. And that gap between presence and absence is what gives the found recording format its emotional weight. The mystery embedded in these recordings, across the entire Fallout series, is what the world sounded like at the moment before silence. What was the last song anyone heard? What was the last conversation recorded on a terminal somewhere that was never encrypted and never accessed until a vault dweller found it 2 centuries later? The wasteland is full of these final documents, and because they are scattered and uncollectible in total, the full picture of that last ordinary day before October 23, 2077, is always just out of reach. Section 10. Things that were almost real. Cut content and lost lore. Some of the most haunting mysteries in the Fallout universe are the ones that were built, partially completed, and then removed before anyone outside the development team could experience them. Vault 24, which appears in Fallout New Vegas's Season 2 on Amazon Prime, was originally designed for the New Vegas game itself. Obsidian Entertainment ran out of time during development, which was notoriously compressed, and Vault 24 was cut. Evidence of its existence survived in the game's code, including a Vault 24 jumpsuit in the data files that could not be obtained through normal gameplay. The Vault was intended to be a brainwashing experiment, the residents subjected to conditioning designed to alter their political and ideological beliefs. When the TV show discovered this piece of cut content and brought it to life in Season 2, they were resurrecting something that had technically always been part of the New Vegas story, but had never been told. There is something philosophically interesting about cut content in general. When a developer builds a location, writes dialogue, designs a vault experiment, and then removes it before release, what is the status of that material? In Fallout's terms, specifically, the lore question is whether the cut content is canon. Does Vault 24 exist in the universe even if you cannot access it in the game? The TV show's decision to include it suggests that the answer, at least for some creatives working in this universe, is yes. The fact that something was planned implies something about the shape of the world being built. The copper horns in Fallout 76 were fully functional musical instruments available in a Bedrock beta period. They came in 10 variants, each capable of 3 tunes, giving 30 unique sounds total. They appeared in Pillager Outpost chests, had a cooldown timer, and were described by developers as social items meant for communication and roleplay. Players enjoyed them. Mojang. Wait, wrong franchise. The Fallout 76 team removed them before full release, citing design goals they had not met and a desire to rethink how musical interaction worked in the game. Van Buren was the codename for the cancelled Fallout 3 that was being developed by Black Isle Studios before the studio closed, and the Fallout IP was sold to Bethesda. The design documents for Van Buren are partially available online, representing an enormous amount of content that was developed but never released. Characters, locations, plot lines, entire regions of the post-apocalyptic American Southwest that were designed in detail and then frozen. The Denver location in Van Buren, a city overrun by feral dogs and inhabited by a small group of survivors called the Ciphers, was partially referenced in Fallout New Vegas with a character named Jacqueline, suggesting that the New Vegas writers were aware of and respectful toward the Van Buren material. The cancelled Fallout Brotherhood of Steel 2 was a sequel to a console game that itself received mixed reviews. The game was cancelled during development, but design documents leaked suggest it would have been set in Texas and would have introduced elements including tribal groups descended from raiders and a large mutant creature called the Vault Dweller. The lore implications of its story were never realized. Texas in the Fallout universe remains one of the least documented regions, which is itself a mystery of a different kind. What happened in Texas? The games have never visited it. A group of people who escaped from a Texas vault show up in Fallout 2 as a small community called the Boomers, but Texas itself is not depicted. Given the game's American setting, and given how much of America has been covered across the series, the consistent absence of Texas is notable. The central part of the continental United States, roughly the Great Plains, is similarly undocumented. Where are the survivors from Kansas? What happened in Iowa? The Midwest chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel, mentioned in Fallout 3, operated in that region, but the games have never gone there. Fallout New Vegas had a location called the Devil's Throat that was partially developed and then stripped of its intended content before release, leaving a location with environmental design but no quests. The Northern Passage in New Vegas, a route that leads toward Caesar's Legion territory in New Mexico, was designed as an entry point for DLC content that was never produced. The Long 15 and Dry Wells, which can be destroyed by Ulysses and Lonesome Road, represent entire potential regions of the wasteland that are described but closed off by the consequences of the ending. Chris Avellone, the lead writer of New Vegas and several DLCs, described in interviews his intention to have Ulysses be a companion character in the base game before becoming the antagonist of the Lonesome Road DLC. The original companion version of Ulysses would have been available from the beginning, and his transformation would have been a slow-burn narrative across the entire playthrough. When the decision was made to cut him from the base game and reserve him for DLC, the character's role changed fundamentally. The version of Ulysses we encounter in Lonesome Road is a man defined by isolation and grief. The original companion version would have been something different, something more complex in its interaction with the player. That version is lost. The Forecaster in New Vegas was originally designed with more content, more predictions, a more developed backstory. The headset he wears was supposed to be explained at some point. The explanation never made it into the final game. He sits in his market stall, headset on, eyes occasionally going unfocused, and the mystery of his ability remains because the answer was cut for time. Fallout 4's development included a questline connected to the dungeon Vault 88 that was meant to explore the full scope of the Vault testing program. The extended version of that content was reserved for the Vault Tech Workshop DLC, which allowed players to build and run their own Vault experiment. The implications of the DLC, that the player character can replicate exactly what Vault Tech did, up to and including conducting unethical experiments on settlers who come to live in the Vault, is one of the most morally challenging pieces of optional content in the series. It was entirely possible to build a completely ethical Vault with the DLC, or to reproduce every horror in the games in a space you personally controlled. That choice, available in the Workshop DLC, is itself a mystery about human nature, rather than about the game's lore. When given the tools, what do players build? The answer, based on what people shared online from their Vault 88 experiences, was everything from cooperative communities to chambers of horrors. The Vault Tech experiment continued, in a sense, in the hands of millions of players who had spent 20 years reading about its cruelty, and then, when given the option, reproduced it. Section 11. The Factions That Never Rested. The Brotherhood of Steel has changed substantially across the Fallout games, and the gaps between those changes contain some of the setting's most interesting unexplained history. The original Brotherhood of Steel, encountered in Fallout 1 and 2, was founded by a U.S. Army soldier named Roger Maxson, who led a mutiny at a West Tech research facility when he discovered the military was conducting unethical human experiments with FEV. Maxson ordered the execution of the facility's scientists, then sealed his unit inside the facility, and declared them independent from the United States government. He established the Brotherhood as a quasi-military order dedicated to preserving pre-war technology, specifically by ensuring it did not fall into the hands of people who could not use it responsibly. This is a surprisingly sympathetic origin for an organization that, in subsequent games, becomes increasingly difficult to root for. The Brotherhood of the Capital Wasteland in Fallout 3, under Elder Lyons, is an outlier, an older man who has modified the Brotherhood's isolationist tech preservation philosophy into something more like humanitarian intervention. He wants to help the wasteland. His order is fractured because of it, with hardliners who believe his approach betrays the Brotherhood's core mission. By Fallout 4, Elder Maxson, a descendant of the founder, has reverted to a stricter interpretation of Brotherhood doctrine. Synths are abominations. The railroad must be destroyed. Technological control must be maintained through force if necessary. The Prydwen, a massive airship that arrives over the Commonwealth at the midpoint of Fallout 4, is a military deployment. The Brotherhood has decided that Boston is a problem requiring a Brotherhood solution. What happened between Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 to the more humanitarian chapter that Elder Lyons built is not explicitly detailed. Lyons died. His daughter Sarah died. What remained of the compassionate approach he had cultivated collapsed or was consumed by the faction's internal politics. The Brotherhood that arrives in Fallout 4 is coherent and powerful and substantially less morally sympathetic than what it was a decade earlier. The mystery here is about institutional drift. How does an organization that contained genuine idealism become something that demands the destruction of self-aware beings because they are synthetic? The answer, presumably, is the same way any organization changes over time. Leadership succession, internal ideological conflict, the gradual victory of one interpretation of a founding document over others. But the games do not show you that process in detail. They show you the before and the after. The New California Republic is a different kind of institutional mystery. In the games, the NCR is the most functional government-like entity in the post-war West, with elections, a military, taxes, law enforcement, and territorial expansion. It is the kind of state that pre-war political theory would recognize as legitimate. It is also stretched thin, bureaucratic in the ways that frustrate people who want things to actually get done, and dependent on a water treaty with New Vegas that puts it at the mercy of Mr. House. The TV show revealed that the NCR's capital, Shady Sands, was destroyed by a nuclear bomb. The timeline of when this happened has been a point of fan debate, but the implication is that a functioning government that had been building something real for decades was erased. What remained of the NCR after that destruction is not fully addressed in the show. Moldaver's faction in the first season is described as NCR remnants, but they are a small group running on old ideals. Whether the NCR as an institution survived the destruction of Shady Sands, whether it has chapters or branches that have continued operating outside of California, is a question the TV show raised and has not yet answered. Caesar's Legion presents a different mystery. The Legion under Caesar Joshua Graham's executed enemy, and later companion of the player in Honest Hearts, is a military autocracy built around the persona and philosophy of one man. Caesar, born Edward Sallow, developed the Legion's structure by studying pre-war history, specifically military history, and applying ancient Roman models to wasteland tribal organization. It is extraordinarily effective as a military force. It is also entirely dependent on the continued existence and authority of Caesar himself. Caesar in New Vegas is dying of a brain tumor. The player can cure him, let him die, or kill him. Whatever the player chooses, the question of what the Legion looks like after Caesar is an enormous one that the series has not yet addressed. The whole structure of the Legion is built around his authority and his philosophy. His historical model, the Roman Legion, eventually became the Roman Empire and then fractured, collapsed, transformed into something unrecognizable over centuries. What does Caesar's Legion become without Caesar? Legatus Lanius, the brutal military commander, would likely simply continue conquering. But conquering toward what? Caesar had a destination. Lanius has an appetite. The fate of the NCR, the fate of the Legion, the internal evolution of the Brotherhood, these are the largest unresolved political questions in the setting. They represent what happens after the endings of the games, the long continuations that Bethesda and the TV show are gradually beginning to address. Section 12. The Wastes Speak, Environmental Mysteries, and the Stories Told by Bones. The most patient storytelling in Fallout happens without words. In the capital wasteland, there is a house. Unremarkable from the outside, like 1,000 other collapsed and debris-filled pre-war structures. Inside, there are skeletons. 2 adult skeletons, positioned at a kitchen table, facing each other, plates and utensils set in front of them. In the center of the table, there is a baby's crib with a small skeleton inside. The family was eating dinner when the bombs fell. The parents were at the table. The infant was in the crib, and they were close enough together that the end found them all at the same moment. Nothing in the room explains who they were. There is no terminal, no journal, no names. They were just a family eating dinner on October 23, 2077, and they are still there, perfectly arranged by the bomb's concussive wave and 200 years of stillness, waiting for someone to walk through the door and notice. Fallout's environmental storytelling trusts that players will look. The designers arranged these tableaus knowing that most players would walk right past them, and that a few would stop and see and feel something that no cutscene or dialogue tree could produce as efficiently. The skeleton family at the table communicates the entire emotional premise of the Fallout universe, in a single room without a single line of text. Elsewhere in Fallout 3, there are 2 skeletons on a rooftop. They are lying side by side. One of them has its arm positioned across the other's chest, the gesture of an embrace. On the night the bombs fell, these two people went to a rooftop and lay down together, and they held each other. That is the entirety of their story. That is enough. A Yao Guai cave in Fallout 3 contains a skeleton at a campfire. The campfire is long extinguished. The skeleton is sitting in a chair, leaned back, rifle across its knees. It is the skeleton of someone who found a cave, built a fire, set watch with a rifle, and died there. Maybe they were sick. Maybe they were simply old and decided to stop. Maybe the fire went out in the night and they froze. The cave is quiet. The Yao Guai that lives there now is either the reason this person stopped, or it moved in afterward. In New Vegas, a hotel room contains a skeleton at a writing desk. On the desk is a stack of papers covered in handwriting. The handwriting is identical across the pages, the same phrase written over and over, thousands of times. It reads, "I don't want to set the world on fire." The song, one of the most iconic in the game, was apparently the last thought of whoever occupied this room. Whether written in obsession, or in madness, or in irony, is impossible to determine. The Super Duper Mart in Fallout 3 contains a terminal log from the night the bombs fell. A manager was trying to organize an emergency response, directing employees to their stations, maintaining order during what the radio was describing as a nuclear emergency. The log stops mid-sentence. Whoever was typing was interrupted, and the interruption was final. There is a section of the Capital Wasteland where, if you explore carefully, you find the skeleton of a man with a skeleton dog beside him. The dog's remains are positioned as if it was trying to nudge its owner awake. Nobody scripted that. Nobody wrote dialogue about it. The props team placed bones in a configuration and trusted that the players who found it would understand. Fallout 4's Commonwealth has a treehouse in the middle of a forest. You have to look up to find it. Inside the treehouse, there are children's toys, a sleeping bag, a holotape that is just static. The treehouse was a child's hiding spot. Whether the child survived the initial bombs or built this afterward is unknowable. Whether they came back to it later is unknowable. The holotape recorded something, and the recording decayed, and what was said is gone. A boat on the edge of a lake in the Commonwealth has two skeletons seated at its bow, fishing poles still rigged over the side, empty bottles on the floor between them. These people were out fishing when the world ended. They did not make it back to shore. The fishing lines are still in the water. A library in the Commonwealth's north has been converted into a Brotherhood of Steel staging post. In one of the upstairs rooms, away from the main Brotherhood operations, there is a small collection of pre-war children's books arranged in a display. Someone in the Brotherhood, probably against regulations, has been preserving those books. No character comments on it. It is just there. Evidence of a specific human impulse toward tenderness in an organization that often presents itself as entirely without sentimentality. In Fallout New Vegas, the town of Nelson is occupied by Caesar's Legion, who have crucified the members of the NCR troop that held the town before them. The crucifixions are not just shock imagery. The rows of crosses along the main road are a statement of Legion doctrine. This is what happens to enemies. But in the houses and structures of Nelson, left over from when the NCR occupied it, there is ordinary life evidence. A photograph on a wall, a card game abandoned on a table. The Legion has made the town a message, but the town itself still holds the memory of people who had ordinary moments inside it. The environmental mystery in Fallout is the same one that runs through all the other mysteries. What was the moment before? Every tableau of bones and abandoned possessions points backward to a life that was interrupted, to a specific human moment that was never completed. The wasteland is full of uncompleted moments. People who sat down to eat and did not finish. People who sat down to write something and stopped. People who sat each other and stayed together until the end. That is the world the Fallout games ask you to walk through. Slowly, paying attention. You are an archaeologist of the recent past. The items you find in rubble are not ancient artifacts. They are 200-year-old evidence of lives that were interrupted by a war that lasted 2 hours and produced these silent, patient mysteries. And they will keep producing them, in every game and every location that gets added to this universe, because the mystery at the center of all of it, the question of who was here, and what happened to them, and what their lives meant, is the kind of mystery that does not resolve. It just continues. Section 13. Things that came back wrong. The ghoul question. Ghouls are one of the most interesting and least fully explained elements of the Fallout universe. The basic biology is established. Humans exposed to high doses of radiation in the initial blast, or over a long period afterward, undergo a process of cellular mutation that destroys aesthetic normalcy, while paradoxically extending life and increasing radiation resistance. The result is a creature that looks like a mummy in the late stages of decomposition, but functions in ways that humans in their prime cannot. Ghouls can walk into highly radioactive areas and be healed by the radiation rather than damaged. Some of them are centuries old. Some of them have maintained their sanity across those centuries, and function as intelligent, if physically unsettling, members of wasteland society. Others have lost coherence entirely and become feral ghouls, aggressive former humans operating on something close to pure instinct. The mystery is the line between the two states. What causes some ghouls to go feral while others maintain intelligence? The games offer theories but not conclusions. The most common in-universe answer is that feral ghouls have experienced prolonged isolation and emotional deprivation, that the loss of social connection and meaningful stimulus over decades eventually degrades the cognitive architecture that makes personhood possible. But this theory does not fully hold, because there are intelligent ghouls who have spent centuries in isolation and maintained their faculties, and there are ghouls who went feral quickly in environments where other ghouls did not. Roy Phillips in Fallout 3, a ghoul leader who wants to take over the Tenpenny Tower community, makes an argument about ghoul rights that the game frames as a moral challenge to the player. The tower's human residents refuse to allow ghouls inside. Phillips wants entry. The game gives you the option of negotiating a peaceful resolution, allowing ghouls to move in alongside the human residents. If you choose this path and return later, you find that the ghoul residents have massacred the humans. Phillips, who argued for peaceful coexistence, participated in the killing. The game is asking whether ghoul personhood is compatible with human community, and it gives you an answer that is deeply uncomfortable regardless of what you thought you were doing. The question of whether ghouls who go feral retain any trace of the person they were is raised most directly in one of Fallout 3's most debated design choices, the karma loss for killing feral ghouls. You lose no karma for killing ferals, which the game implicitly classifies them as no longer morally equivalent to persons. But the biological process that produces a feral ghoul is the same process that produces an intelligent one. The difference appears to be in the mind rather than in the body. At what point in the degradation process did that person, specifically, stop being a person? Raul Tejada in New Vegas is an intelligent ghoul who has been alive since before the Great War. He was a mechanic in Mexico City. He survived the bombs. He watched the world remake itself around him over 200 years. The things he lost, the people who died, the cultures and languages that faded, add up to a weight that he carries with a kind of black humor that is recognizably the coping mechanism of someone who has experienced so much loss that direct grief would be paralyzing. Raul is one of the oldest characters in the Fallout universe who can actually speak to you. He remembers the old world not as historical data, but as personal experience. He knew people. He had a job. He had a home. The Great War did not end history for him. It just ended the world he had known and left him in the ruins of it for a very long time. The question his existence raises, never directly answered, is what it costs to live that long. The games give him self-deprecating humor and a practical skill set and a companion quest about whether an ancient man can still find purpose. They do not fully address the mathematics of 2 centuries of accumulated grief. Maybe that is appropriate. Maybe that math is not computable. Billy in Fallout 4 is a ghoulified child who has been locked in a refrigerator for over 200 years and survived. The game presents this without extensive explanation. Ghouls do not require food or water in the same way humans do, but even by those standards, 2 centuries in a sealed refrigerator raises biological questions the game does not engage with. Billy is cheerful and disoriented and looking for his parents, who are also ghouls and also alive somewhere in the Commonwealth. The family reunification quest is one of the gentler things in Fallout 4, a small story of a family that survived things it should not have survived and is trying to find its way back to each other. The refrigerator survival trope is a callback to the opening of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and the game winks at this. But the mystery beneath the wink is a real one. If ghouls can survive 2 centuries in a sealed container, what else have they survived? What other ghouls are out there? Locked in rooms or under rubble or at the bottom of lakes, still alive. having been accidentally preserved by circumstances that have kept them cut off from a world that has changed entirely around them. The ghoul in the TV show, Cooper Howard, is perhaps the most fully realized exploration of what centuries of ghoul life looks like from the inside. He was a Hollywood actor, a cowboy persona built for cheerful Vault-Tec advertising, a man with a family and a career and a moral framework, who became something that kills efficiently and trusts almost nothing. The gap between the person he was and what he has become is 200 years wide, and the show fills it gradually. He is not a monster. He is a person who has been damaged by time in ways that look like monstrousness but are, at some level, survival adaptations. When the ghoul finds a cryopod with his wife's name on it, containing only a postcard to Colorado, he concludes she is still alive. After 200 years, the certainty of that conclusion, based on such slender evidence, reveals something about what ghoul psychology looks like in the long term. The grip on hope becomes obsessive, because hope is one of the few things that has kept the long centuries bearable. Section 14. The Weight of Names. Vault Boy, Nuka-Cola, and the Corporate Prehistory. Before the world ended, it was marketed to. Vault-Tec's mascot, the Vault Boy, is one of the most recognizable characters in gaming. The cheerful, rosy-cheeked cartoon figure with his thumbs-up gesture appears everywhere, on perk icons, on merchandise, on the loading screens, on the packaging of in-world products, on murals in actual vault corridors. He is the face of a corporation that treated its own customers as laboratory animals, and the gap between the warmth of the aesthetic and the reality of what the company did is itself a kind of horror. The thumbs-up gesture, in-universe, is a technique for gauging radiation. You hold up your thumb toward a nuclear detonation. If the fireball is larger than your thumb, you are too close and should run. The gesture that Vault Boy has come to represent cheerfulness and safety is rooted in a survival calculation for nuclear blast exposure. The mascot's most iconic pose is about measuring how much danger you are in. Nuka-Cola is the ubiquitous pre-war beverage scattered across every game, its glowing bottles still recognizable in the ruins. The Nuka-Cola Corporation was one of pre-war America's largest companies, with a product line that expanded to include dozens of variants including Nuka-Cola Quantum, which glows blue from the addition of a radioactive isotope. The corporate documentation found in Fallout 4's Nuka World DLC reveals a company that was aware its products were not healthy, that cut corners on ingredient safety, and that used extremely aggressive marketing tactics including subliminal advertising techniques in its Nuka World amusement park. The mystery of Nuka-Cola, in a sense, is why it still exists. The syrup has degraded, presumably. The caps off of Nuka-Cola bottles have become the primary currency of the wasteland. The bottles themselves are collector's items in some contexts. Something about the product's presence in every ruin, every cabinet, every abandoned vending machine, gives it a permanence that transcends its origin as a consumer good. It became the closest thing the wasteland has to a shared cultural artifact. Everyone who survived the war, and everyone born after it, grew up with the visual and physical presence of Nuka-Cola in a way that no other single object matches. The corporate landscape of pre-war Fallout is populated by names that appear everywhere. Robco Industries, Pip-Boys, Protectrons, Mr. Handy Robots, General Atomics International, The Nuclear Appliances, West Tech Research, FEV, Power Armor, Vault-Tec, Poseidon Energy. These companies shaped the pre-war world. Their products still define the post-war world. The choices these corporations made, the research they pursued, the safety standards they did or did not apply, the experiments they ran, continue to affect everyone alive 200 years after the companies themselves ceased to exist. In one of the terminals in Fallout 4's Diamond City, there is a note from someone who has been trying to catalog all the corporate logos visible from a single rooftop. They found logos from 11 different pre-war corporations on buildings visible within a one-block radius. The corporate branding of the old world covered every surface, and it survived. The companies are gone, but their marks remain on the landscape. Their names attached to technologies that are still running. Their mascots still smiling from crumbling facades. The mystery is what those corporations knew. The Vault-Tec executives who sat in that boardroom meeting knew they were designing experiments. West Tech scientists knew what they were doing with FEV. The energy companies knew the resource wars they were profiting from would eventually culminate in something catastrophic. The corporations of the Fallout universe are not simply greedy institutions that happened to be present when things went wrong. They are institutions that made choices that made things go wrong, that had information and power that could have been used differently and was not. The cheerful logos and the smiling mascots and the retro-futurist aesthetics are the mask over that knowledge. Every Nuka-Cola bottle in the wasteland is a relic of a civilization that knew more than it said and acted in its own interest until it was too late for anyone. Section 15. The Question of God in the Wasteland. Several of the questions in the Fallout universe eventually bend towards something that no amount of terminal reading can settle: whether anything in this universe is genuinely supernatural. The children of Adam believe that nuclear radiation is divine. Specifically, they believe that atoms are worlds, that splitting an atom creates countless new realities, and that the Great War was an act of cosmic generation rather than destruction. The devastation of 2077, in their theology, was not catastrophe but genesis. The radiation that sickens and kills ordinary people is, to the children of Adam, a blessing, a physical touch from a deity that is simultaneously destructive and creative. This is not simply a metaphor for trauma. The children of Adam include individuals who have genuine immunity to radiation, who can walk into locations that should be lethal and emerge unharmed. The game offers biological explanations for some of these cases: advanced mutation, extensive ghoulification, genetic anomalies. But not all of them are easily explained. Some devotees simply appear to be protected by something that does not show up in a straightforward biological analysis. The High Confessor in Far Harbor, Tectus, is a fanatic. He wants to destroy Far Harbor. His interpretation of Adam is violent. But Dima, who wants to replace him with a more moderate leader, acknowledges that the children's faith is genuine and that their community has something real at its center, even if its current leadership is dangerous. The question the game keeps asking around the edges of the Children of Adam content is whether Adam is real, whether there is something in nuclear radiation beyond the biological effects that science documents, whether the deity being invoked is a story that people tell to make sense of survival, or whether survival in that specific way, surrounded by that specific radiation, in those specific locations, requires something in addition to science to explain. Joshua Graham, in Fallout, New Vegas's Honest Hearts DLC, is a man who was bound and burned and thrown into the Grand Canyon by Caesar, who wanted to make an example of his former legate. Graham survived. He should not have. Third-degree burns over his entire body, thrown off a cliff into a canyon, and he walked out of the bottom and began the long process of recovery. He attributes his survival to divine intervention. He is a devout Mormon, and he came through an experience that should have killed him with his faith reinforced rather than broken. The game does not tell you whether Joshua Graham survived by divine intervention or by extraordinary physical and psychological resilience, or whether those two explanations are, in his case, the same thing. It presents him as he is: scarred, brilliant, morally serious, occasionally frightening, and absolutely certain that something was keeping him alive. Yug Qualtoth, the entity invoked in the Dunwich material, represents the oldest and least answered supernatural question in the Fallout canon. The entity is named. A cult exists in its honor. A physical artifact, the obelisk, is associated with it. Rituals were performed in its name before and presumably after the war. What it actually is, whether it is a genuine supernatural entity, or a psychological focus for a cult community, or something the Dunwich building is generating through mechanisms not yet explained in the games, is entirely open. The Fallout universe was built as science fiction, but it has spent 28 years putting things in the world that science fiction cannot fully account for. Prophecy, visions, ancient cults with real effects, entities that may be older than nuclear fire. The question of whether the supernatural is real in Fallout is a question the games keep building toward without ever answering, because the answer might foreclose possibilities that the world's creators want to remain open. Section 16. The Divide and what it means to ruin a thing without knowing. The Divide is a location in Fallout, New Vegas's Lonesome Road DLC that was, before the events of the story, a thriving settlement. People had been building there. The location had potential, a natural geography that suited defense, a community that was coalescing around something genuine. The courier passed through. They delivered a package that contained, or activated, or transmitted something that caused the old military warheads buried in the area to detonate. The Divide was destroyed, the people building there died. The location became a landscape of fractured terrain, endless windstorms, and tunneler creatures that came up from underground to fill the space where community had been. Ulysses was there. He survived. He saw it happen. He watched people who were beginning to believe in something lose that belief along with their lives, and he has been trying to work out who to blame ever since. The mystery of the divide is not what happened. Lonesome Road explains what happened in reasonable detail. The mystery is whether blame is meaningful in the situation. The courier did not know what the package would do. They did not know the divide existed as more than a delivery point on a route. The action that destroyed a settlement was taken without knowledge of its consequences by someone following a professional task. This is the structure of many of the worst things that happen in history. Not malice. Not ignorance exactly. A gap between the knowledge needed to foresee consequences and the action taken. The courier carrying a package they did not inspect. A scientist approving an experiment without seeing the full context of how it was going to be used. An executive signing a document without reading the footnotes that would have changed everything. Ulysses says that symbols survive when the things they represent die. The flag of a nation that no longer exists. The logo of a corporation whose last employee turned to bones 2 centuries ago. The name of a faction that split and scattered and reinvented itself so many times that the original meaning has been entirely lost. The divide was in the process of becoming something, and the package destroyed it before it could fully form. Whatever symbol it would have become was never made. That is the specific grief at the center of Lonesome Road. Not the destruction of what existed, but the destruction of what was becoming, the potential that was ended before it could take form. Ulysses is not mourning a completed thing. He is mourning an interruption. Section 17. Herobrine. Wait, wrong script. Let us instead talk about something that has been sitting in the Fallout universe since the very beginning. The mystery of what the wasteland is building toward. The games and the TV show keep returning to a fundamental tension between two philosophies of reconstruction. One says that you take what survived the war and use it as the foundation for something new, maintaining continuity with the old world while adapting to the new conditions. The NCR is this philosophy in action, a recognizable governmental structure descended from pre-war institutions. The Brotherhood of Steel, with its libraries of old technology and its military hierarchy, is a variation on this. The Enclave is its extreme version. Restore America, but restore it in the image of its most exclusionary version. The other philosophy says the old world was the problem, that the institutions and ideologies that produced the Great War were not worth preserving, that the wasteland needs to begin from something new, something that is not haunted by the failures of what came before. Ulysses articulates this in Lonesome Road. Caesar articulates his version of it in New Vegas, though his new world is simply brutality rationalized through Roman historical analogy. Some of the smaller communities scattered across the wasteland, the ones that have built functional local cultures without reference to the old world's categories, are quietly practicing this philosophy without necessarily theorizing about it. The mystery of what the Fallout universe is building toward is not answered by any of the games individually. It is a question the whole series is asking, game by game, DLC by DLC, and now season by season of the TV show. After 200 years, is humanity rebuilding something recognizable as civilization? And if it is that actually progress, or is it just approaching the same conditions that produced October 23, 2077? Section 18. The Water Question and Project Purity's Aftermath. Project Purity, the water purification system at the center of Fallout 3's story, is described in the game as capable of purifying all of the Potomac River Basin's water. The implications of this for the capital wasteland are significant. Clean water, freely available, fundamentally changes the survival calculus for every community in the region. It reduces the value of bottle caps as water currency. It reduces the power of anyone who controls water access. It is the most transformative infrastructure project in the post-war East Coast. The game ends, depending on your choice, with the purifier either operational or containing a modified FEV that will kill irradiated beings. Assuming the good ending, Project Purity is running, and the wasteland's water is being purified. The mystery is what came next, and the games do not tell you. Fallout 4 is set in Boston, not DC, and while characters occasionally reference events from the capital wasteland, the long-term consequences of Project Purity on the region's political and social structure are not detailed. Did clean water change everything? Did the Brotherhood of Steel, who controlled the purifier in the good ending, use that control to consolidate power? Did the availability of clean water reduce violence, or did it simply shift the resource conflict to something else? The Purifier itself is a quiet question in the Fallout 4 timeline. 10 years have passed. The Purifier is presumably still running. The Brotherhood chapter that Elder Maximus leads has since left the capital wasteland for Boston. What condition did they leave the region in? Who maintains the Purifier now? Is the water still flowing? These are not rhetorical questions. They are structural gaps in the world building that the series has not chosen to fill. The most significant humanitarian achievement in any of the games is followed by silence. Section 19. The Zetans, and the oldest visitors. Aliens in the Fallout universe are called Zetans, and their presence has been confirmed across multiple games with varying levels of narrative weight. In Fallout 1, players could find a crashed UFO near the glow. In Fallout 3's Mothership Zeta DLC, the lone wanderer was abducted by an alien vessel and encountered humans from across different historical periods who had also been abducted, some of them from centuries before the Great War. The Zetans have been visiting Earth, taking samples, conducting experiments on humans and animals for a very long time. The mystery of what they want is never fully resolved. They appear to be collectors. They have humans in stasis. They have alien weapons and alien machines, and an evident interest in terrestrial biology that predates any recorded history of contact. They did not start the Great War, as far as anyone can determine. They seem to have observed it and, in some cases, used its aftermath as an opportunity to continue their collection activities. In Fallout 76, Zetan agents have apparently been embedded in human society, working with the aliens to help identify and capture suitable subjects for their programs. The Flatwoods Monster is connected to this. Humans who work for alien interests in exchange for something. Technology, longevity, knowledge, are one of the most unsettling ideas in the setting. A fifth column of alien collaborators in pre-war and post-war American society. What the Zetans want from their centuries of Earth observation is not stated. They have watched humanity develop nuclear technology. They were present when that technology was used to near-destroy human civilization. They are still here. Whether their continued presence is scientific, acquisitive, protective in some incomprehensible way, or threatening, is a question that the Mothership Zeta DLC gestured toward and then moved past without fully answering. The Zetan's gun, the Alien Blaster, is one of the more powerful weapons in most of the games it appears in. The fact that these weapons end up in player character hands frequently is mildly surreal when you think about it. The weapons of an interstellar species that has been observing Earth for centuries are just lying around in the wasteland, occasionally salvageable by scavengers who have no idea what they are. Section 20. The Songs in the Static. What the Radio Tells Us. Three Dogs Galaxy News Radio in Fallout 3 is one of the few broadcasting voices in the capital wasteland. His selections, his commentary, his presence as an ongoing voice in the silence of the wasteland serve a function that the game acknowledges directly. Someone needs to be telling the truth, and someone needs to keep the music playing. The songs on Galaxy News Radio were selected from the real world, licensed tracks from the pre-war era of the game's alternate history. Each one was chosen with awareness of what the world looks like while it plays. Anything Goes by Cole Porter plays over a world where things have gone catastrophically wrong. I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire by the Ink Spots plays in a universe that already has. Butcher Pete describes someone cutting up meat with abandon while the player character dispatches raiders. The gap between the music's original context and its current context is the gap between the old world and the new, and it is constantly funny and constantly sad. Fallout. New Vegas uses a different radio station format, giving you Mojave Music Radio, which is more ambient and less hosted, and Mr. New Vegas, an AI radio host voiced by Wayne Newton, who delivers news and commentary in the same unflappable manner, regardless of what the player character has done. Mr. New Vegas is cheerful about everything. He reports on atrocities with the same pleasant tone he uses for good news. He is either a coping mechanism the game is modeling, or a commentary on media, or both. The radio in the Fallout universe is not just background music. It is the last form of mass communication in a world that has lost all others. It is how communities know that someone else is out there. The mystery of the radio is not what it plays, but what it represents. The decision to keep broadcasting even when you are not sure anyone is listening. Three Dog explains his mission directly. He believes the stories of what happens in the wasteland need to be told, that the truth needs a voice, that silence is worse than the flawed, partial, sometimes incorrect broadcast he is able to produce. That is a philosophy that has relevance well beyond a game about nuclear fallout. Section 21. The Last Mysteries. There are questions in the Fallout universe that will likely never be answered, because answering them would close off space that has been productively open for decades. What is the mysterious stranger's full identity and origin? Why does Fallout 4 never address Project Purity's long-term consequences? What became of the Forecaster's abilities? Did Joshua Graham survive by miracle or by extraordinary biology? What is Oog-Qualtoth actually? Is there anything to the Mothman's apparent prescience, or is the cult simply a group that got lucky? What happened in the years between the fall of the Institute and the events of any hypothetical Fallout 5? What does the wasteland of Texas look like? Who were the Zetans before they became galactic collectors of terrestrial life? What does the NCR look like in 2296? These questions are not unanswered because the creators were careless. They are unanswered because mystery is the condition of the Fallout universe. A world destroyed by 200 years of war, radiation, time, and neglect does not yield its secrets easily. The people who knew the answers are bones. The terminals that recorded them have been wiped or water damaged. The holotapes have decayed. The only things that remain are fragments, and the work of living in that world is the work of assembling fragments into a partial picture that is never complete and that keeps requiring revision. That is, in a quiet way, what history actually is. Not a complete record, but a collection of what survived, assembled into a story by people who were not there, trying to understand what happened to the ones who were. The Fallout universe makes that process tactile and immediate. You walk through the ruins yourself. You find the fragments yourself. You assemble the picture in your own order, discovering the pieces as your exploration takes you. And the picture you build is partly determined by where you chose to walk and what you chose to look at. Two players of the same game will have experienced different mysteries, found different fragments, built different pictures. The world is large enough and the secrets are numerous enough that no single playthrough encounters everything. This means that the Fallout universe, at its best, is not a story being told to you, but a world you are exploring, and the mysteries you find are the ones your path happened to cross. That is a remarkable thing to build. And it is the reason, 28 years after the first game and hundreds of hours of collective exploration later, that the questions keep feeling fresh. You never quite reach the bottom of it. There is always another terminal, another holotape, another skeleton arranged in a pose that asks a question without providing an answer. The wasteland is patient. It has been waiting for you to look more carefully. Section 20T2. Things that never quite fit. Among the hundreds of small mysteries scattered through the games, some of the most enduring are the ones that do not fit neatly into any category. The Forecaster's headset. Why does a child in New Vegas who can see the future need a piece of technology on his head? Did someone build it for him? Did he build it himself? Is the headset helping, or is it incidental to his ability? The game places it on him, makes it visually distinctive, and then declines to explain it. Some players have theorized that the headset is a receiver, that it is picking up signals from somewhere, perhaps from Big MT, perhaps from something else. No evidence for this exists in the game. It is a theory born from the shape of an unanswered question. The lone wanderer's father in Fallout 3, James, left Vault 101 without explanation, abandoning his child, to pursue Project Purity. His motivations are explained when you find him. He believes the Purifier is the most important thing he can do with his life. But the question of how a man who clearly loved his child came to the conclusion that leaving that child to pursue a project in a radioactive wasteland was acceptable is only partially answered by his dialogue. He is filled with conviction, but his logic, examined carefully, requires a level of certainty about the project's success that seems unjustified given the available evidence when he decided to leave. The question of the sole survivor's memories in Fallout 4 is similarly incomplete. They remember a clear, coherent pre-war life. They have enough emotional investment in their dead spouse and stolen child to drive the entire game. But 210 years have passed. The brain does not store memories across 210 years of cryogenic suspension, without some degradation, presumably. Are the memories the sole survivor has fully accurate? Are the pre-war scenes shown in flashback representations of actual events, or reconstructions colored by 210 years of being frozen and then woken up in a destroyed world? The garden gnomes of Far Harbor. There are hundreds of them across the island, posed in tableau, many of them positioned near skeletons with weapons in hand. Someone has been arranging them. The game does not explain who. Raiders, presumably, for reasons of humor or menace. But the specific patience of the arrangements, the consistency of the staging, suggests either a single person with a very specific project or a tradition that has been maintained by multiple people over time. Neither explanation is given. The gnomes just sit there, arranged in their little dramas, waiting. The mannequins that appear throughout the Commonwealth in Fallout 4 are dressed and positioned in ways that suggest someone has been spending significant time with them. Scenes of mannequins at dinner tables, mannequins positioned as if in conversation, mannequins holding weapons, mannequins dressed in particular outfits. Some of these arrangements are raiders, confirmed by nearby evidence. Others are in locations that raiders would not typically frequent. The possibility that someone or some group in the Commonwealth has developed a specific compulsion around mannequin arrangement is dark in a way the game never explores directly. The entirety of the Cabot House questline in Fallout 4 introduces a family that has been kept alive for 400 years by an artifact connected to an alien signal. Lorenzo Cabot has been imprisoned in a specially constructed cell for over a century by his own family. He is not a pleasant person, but the ethical question of how long it is acceptable to imprison someone who might be dangerous, versus the risk of releasing them, is one the game raises through the questline and does not resolve definitively. The artifact that has kept the family alive is of unknown origin, alien adjacent but not definitively Zetan. What it is and what it was designed for is not explained. These small mysteries share a characteristic. They are not the main event. They are the details at the edge of the frame, present for players who look carefully, and absent for players who do not. The Fallout universe has been built by teams of people who took pleasure in hiding things, in suggesting implications, in placing details that reward attention without requiring it. The result is a world that gets richer the longer you spend in it, that always seems to have one more layer to uncover. Section 23. The music between the moments. One of the questions that no lore deep dive fully addresses is what the moments between quests sound like in the Fallout universe. The ambient soundscape of the games, the distant wind, the occasional creak of a ruined building settling, the buzz of a rad scorpion somewhere in the dark, the distant thunk of an explosion, a radio playing old music from behind a broken door. These constitute a form of storytelling that is not narrative in the traditional sense. They are the texture of the world between events. In the quiet sections, walking long stretches of open wasteland between destinations, the Fallout universe communicates a specific emotional quality that is hard to name precisely. It is not quite loneliness. It is not quite peace. It is something like the feeling of standing in a very old place, a place that was once full of people and now is not, and being aware of the gap between what it was and what it is, and understanding that time has passed here, that things were lost here, that the current silence is not original silence but silence that arrived after something. Inon Zur's instrumental scores for the modern games capture this quality specifically. The music does not resolve. It does not build toward catharsis. It sits in a register of sustained, melancholic beauty, the kind of music that belongs to spaces that have been abandoned but not forgotten. It is music for ruins. It is music for the long pause after something that cannot be undone. The mystery of how the Fallout universe feels, which is distinct from what it means or what happened in it, is embedded in those ambient textures. It is a world that sounds like something is missing. It sounds like October 22nd, 2077. Except that October 22nd is 200 years ago, and everything that was there has turned to rust and bone. Section 24. The question of closure. Mysteries in the Fallout universe do not resolve the way mysteries in detective fiction resolve. There is no final revelation that makes everything previously confusing click into place. The pieces accumulate, context is added, theories are refined, and the picture gets clearer without ever becoming complete. That is true to the nature of the world being depicted. A civilization has been destroyed. Its records are fragmentary. The people who knew the full story are dead. What remains is what survived. Environmental evidence, partial records, the testimony of very long-lived individuals who themselves have imperfect memories, and the ongoing behavior of institutions that were built from the wreckage and have been adapting ever since. Real historical understanding has the same quality. We know more about some eras of the past than others, but we never know everything. The gap between what happened and what is recorded is always large, and the gap between what is recorded and what is understood is larger still. Historians work with fragments the same way the Fallout player character works with holotapes and terminals, assembling what they can from what survived, knowing that the picture they build is partial and provisional, and will need to be revised when something new is found. The Fallout universe, at its best, respects this. It builds a world that feels historically dense, like there is more there than any single playthrough can access. Like the people who lived and died before the player character arrived, had full lives that the game is only showing you in cross-section. The mystery is not a puzzle to be solved. It is an acknowledgement that the world is larger than any single perspective can contain. That acknowledgement, extended across dozens of games and hundreds of hours and 28 years of accumulated lore, is what keeps the Fallout universe compelling. Not resolution, not completion. The ongoing and patient presence of things not yet understood, waiting for someone to walk by and notice. The wasteland is full of them. There is always another one just over the ridge, just down in the metro, just behind that terminal with the password you finally cracked. There is always one more mystery to keep you company in the quiet. Thank you for spending this time wandering the wasteland with me. If you made it this far, you are the kind of person who finds meaning in the details, who takes pleasure in sitting with questions that do not have clean answers. This video exists for you. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button. If you want more of these long, quiet explorations of the worlds and games you love, subscribing keeps you in the loop every time a new one goes up. The Fallout universe has more mysteries than any single video can contain. There will be more. Stay safe out there. Drink your Nuka-Cola. Watch the horizon. End of script. Section 25. The Brotherhood's Eastern March, and what it cost. When the Brotherhood of Steel airship, the Prydwen, arrived over the Commonwealth in Fallout 4, it arrived like a statement. The ship is enormous, a flying fortress, unmistakable in the sky above the ruins of Boston. Its arrival was not quiet, it was not subtle. It was a demonstration of power, technological and military, directed at a region that had been operating without any such demonstration for 2 centuries. The mystery surrounding Elder Maxon's decision to deploy the Prydwen to the Commonwealth is only partially addressed in the game. The official justification centers on the Institute, the synth-producing faction that Maxon views as an existential threat requiring elimination. The Brotherhood came east to destroy the Institute and secure its technology. That is the stated mission. But there are inconsistencies in that framing. The Brotherhood under Elder Lyons had already been stationed in the capital wasteland for decades, operating as a humanitarian force alongside their usual technology acquisition goals. The chapter Maxon leads is centered in that same region. The distance between DC and Boston is not so great as to require an airship deployment rather than a ground advance. The Prydwen represents a specific choice to project power by air, to be visible from a distance, to announce arrival rather than simply arriving. The question is whether Maxon's Brotherhood is expanding or consolidating. The Capital Wasteland chapter was famously fractured by Elder Lyons' humanitarian detour from Brotherhood orthodoxy. Maxon, who rose to leadership young and under circumstances that are never fully detailed in the games, may be using the Institute as a justification for something else, the reassertion of Brotherhood dominance over a region that has spent decades operating without them, and the establishment of a precedent for what Brotherhood presence means in the post-Lyons era. Arthur Maxon is one of Fallout 4's more psychologically interesting characters, if you choose to spend time with him. He is young for the position he holds. He carries the weight of a lineage, the surname that founded the Brotherhood, and the expectation that this history places on his decisions. He can be generous with respect to his subordinates and completely inflexible with respect to his doctrine. His disgust for synths is not explained as personal experience but as philosophical conviction, which makes it harder to reason with. He does not hate synths because they hurt him. He hates them because of what he believes they represent. What he will become, whether the arc of his leadership will bend towards something more like Elder Lyons' humanity, or harden further into something colder, is a question the series has not yet answered. By the time of the TV show, the Brotherhood in California is under different leadership and has a different cultural register, though the core institutional identity persists. The relationship between the California chapter and the East Coast chapter, the degree to which they coordinate or diverge, is another of the large structural questions the series keeps leaving partially open. The Prydwen's ultimate fate in Fallout 4 depends on which faction the player supports. It can be destroyed, rendering the Brotherhood's eastern deployment moot. It can survive, leaving the Brotherhood as the dominant power in the region. Neither outcome addresses what the Brotherhood does next in a longer timeline. Aircraft like the Prydwen require enormous maintenance resources. Sustaining a military presence in a new region, while also maintaining operations in the capital wasteland, would stretch any organization thin. The logistics of the Brotherhood's expansion are a practical puzzle that the games do not explore in detail. The deeper mystery is what the Brotherhood is for in a post-Institute world. Their original purpose was technology preservation and controlled acquisition. The Institute is gone or diminished, depending on ending choice. The major technological threat in the region has been neutralized. What does an army built to fight a war do when the war is over? What does a doctrine built around a specific enemy become when that enemy no longer exists? Institutions that define themselves through opposition to something face an existential question when the opposition is removed. The Brotherhood of Steel has been defining itself against various technological threats since its founding. But the threats change while the institution's internal culture and hierarchy remain relatively fixed. Roger Maxon's original Brotherhood was fighting a specific wrong: military experimentation on unwilling subjects. Arthur Maxon's Brotherhood is fighting what feels to him like a categorical wrong: the creation of artificial life. When artificial life is no longer being created in the Commonwealth, when the Institute is gone, the Brotherhood will need a new definition of the threat that justifies its existence. The games have not shown us what that next definition will be. The TV show suggests that the California chapter has been struggling with similar questions, has been factionalizing under the pressure of purpose that has not evolved to match changing circumstances. The Brotherhood is one of the Fallout universe's most enduring mysteries precisely because it is an institution that has survived its original context and is still trying to figure out what it is now. Section 26, M.R. House's long calculation. Robert House calculated that nuclear war would occur by no later than 2780, give or take. His actual margin of error was enormous, but the direction of the prediction was correct. He prepared for it. His preparation worked well enough that New Vegas survived. And then he waited for the delivery that would complete his defense network, and it arrived one day late. That late delivery has been the source of sustained fan discussion for years. If the Platinum chip had arrived on time, 68 of 77 warheads might have become 76 of 77. If 76 of 77 had been intercepted, the Strip and surrounding area would have been almost completely undamaged. The Vegas of 2281 would look dramatically different from the Vegas of Fallout. New Vegas, both more intact and presumably more functional. The political landscape of the Mojave might have developed in entirely different directions. One day, the margin between the Vegas we see in New Vegas and a Vegas that retained far more of its pre-war structure was a single day. Mr. House's obsession with that missed delivery, and his long-running effort to track down the Platinum chip, is the inciting event of the entire game. The chip is not just hardware. It is the completion of the work he started before the war. The final piece of a plan that has been waiting 200 years for its conclusion. When he gets it, he can upgrade his Securitron army and become the undisputed power in the Mojave. Without it, he is a powerful man in a box, dependent on others to extend his influence. The mystery of Mr. House is what he was like before the war, before 2 centuries in that box, before watching the world evolve through monitors, while his body gradually stopped being something he could use. The game provides biographical fragments. He was brilliant. He was difficult. He founded Robco at age 22 and turned it into one of the pre-war world's largest technology companies. He had no patience for people he considered less intelligent. He drove away partners and employees who disagreed with him. He has been alone for 200 years with his calculations and his monitors. The personality that emerges from that isolation, controlled, cold, strategically patient, capable of genuine insight and completely devoid of sentimentality, is either what he always was, or what 200 years of solitary superintelligence eventually produces. The game does not clearly distinguish between the two. His vision for the future, as expressed in conversation with the Courier, is one of the most detailed long-term plans in the series. He wants to outlive his current form. He wants to achieve something like digital consciousness. He wants to establish a space program within 20 years of securing New Vegas, expand into the solar system within a century, and begin interstellar colonization within a few centuries after that. He is not nostalgic. He does not want to restore the old world. He wants to use the old world's most useful fragments as a launching pad for something the old world never managed to build. Whether Mr. House would actually deliver on these plans if given the opportunity, whether a single brilliant and isolated man with no effective checks on his power would build the future he describes, or simply build a monument to his own control, is the question the game leaves unresolved. He might be the best option the Mojave has. He also might be the seed of a new autocracy. The player cannot verify which from within the game. That is, deliberately. the point. And that deliberate uncertainty, the game's refusal to endorse any of its major factions unequivocally, is the philosophy underneath all of Obsidian's work on New Vegas. Real choices are choices between imperfect options, and understanding that imperfection requires knowing something about the options' histories and structures and likely futures. The game provides enough information to form opinions. It withholds enough to prevent certainty. That is the space where genuine moral reasoning happens. Section 27. The Railroad and the Ethics of Freedom. The Railroad is an organization operating in secret in the Commonwealth in Fallout 4, dedicated to freeing sentient synths from the Institute and giving them new identities, new lives, new places to exist as free beings. They have a history extending back more than a century, with multiple generations of operatives who have died protecting synths, and a tradition of code names and clandestine protocols built around the constant threat of Institute exposure. Their work requires them to believe, as a foundational premise, that third-generation synths are persons, that the minds running in those bodies are genuine, that the experiences they have matter, that the Institute's claim of ownership over created beings is morally illegitimate. The railroad is built on this premise, the way the original Underground Railroad in American history was built on the premise that enslaved human beings were fully human and deserved freedom. The parallel is intentional. The organization uses the same name, the same imagery of safe houses and secret routes and coded language, the same structure of an illegal liberation network operating inside a system that has decided certain beings do not count. The game asks you to evaluate the parallel, and the evaluation is not simple. Synths were not born. They were manufactured. Their original memories were programmed. Their personalities were designed. But by the time the railroad is helping them, the individual synths they assist have been living as persons for long enough that the distinction between designed personality and developed personality is effectively meaningless. Nick Valentine has lived as himself for long enough that his origin as a synth is almost irrelevant to who he currently is. Paladin Danse has lived an entire life as a Brotherhood soldier without any awareness of his synthetic origin. The mystery the railroad raises is whether freedom requires awareness. Can someone be liberated from a condition they are not aware they are in? The railroad's answer is yes. The wrongness of ownership does not require the owned person's awareness of it. The Brotherhood's answer is no, but for a different reason. The Brotherhood does not believe synths are persons regardless of their awareness. The Institute's answer is that the question is irrelevant, because their creations are property. The player character must navigate between these positions without the game telling them which is correct. The Railroad's ideology is sympathetic, but their methods occasionally cause collateral damage they do not fully account for. The Brotherhood's ideology is coherent, but its application requires the death of beings who have done nothing wrong. The Institute's ideology is the most internally consistent, but also the most horrifying in its implications. The fate of the Railroad in the different endings of Fallout 4 ranges from survival to annihilation. What the organization looks like 10 years later, whether the synths that helped to freedom are living the lives they were given, whether the Railroad continues its work or has been permanently destroyed, is not addressed in subsequent material. The question of what you do with a liberation movement when the institution it was fighting is gone is a real historical question, and the Fallout universe raises it without pursuing the answer. Section 28. The Strange Cartography of the Wastes. Maps in the Fallout universe are unreliable in specific ways, and that unreliability is itself a mystery. The Capital Wasteland of Fallout 3, the Commonwealth of Fallout 4, the Mojave of New Vegas. Each of these represents a specific American region in 2277 or thereabouts, and each of them is geographically compressed from its real-world counterpart in ways that the games do not explicitly acknowledge. The Boston of Fallout 4 is navigable in a way that the actual city of Boston, even in ruins, would not be. The DC Metro system of Fallout 3 bears only approximate relationship to the actual DC Metro layout, compressed and rearranged to serve gameplay purposes. This compression is a practical game design necessity. You cannot build a 1:1 scale of any real American city in a game engine and expect it to be playable. The world must be reduced to something navigable in gameplay terms while maintaining enough of the original geography's character to be recognizable. But the compression raises questions when you think about the lore implications. If the Commonwealth is that small, how does it support enough population to sustain the factions, economies, and conflicts depicted in the game? If the Capital Wasteland is that contained, Where are the tens of millions of people who lived in the greater DC metro area before the war? The answer is that most of them are dead. The Great War killed an enormous percentage of the population immediately, and 2 centuries of radiation, starvation, predation, and violence killed most of the rest. The game's population density, which feels sparse, is actually consistent with what a region would look like after multiple generations of catastrophic mortality and essentially no organized healthcare, agriculture, or infrastructure. But the cartography holds stranger mysteries in specific cases. The glowing sea in Fallout 4, the highly radioactive crater region in the southwestern Commonwealth, is the ground zero of one of the bombs that struck the Boston area. It is so thoroughly irradiated that even hardened characters take significant damage walking through it. The communities that have formed at its edges treat it with a reverence that mixes religious awe with practical survival knowledge. What is in the center of the glowing sea is only partially answered by the game. There is a laboratory, a crashed aircraft, a cultist settlement. There are also spaces that the game simply does not populate with content, areas that look like they should contain something and do not. These may be areas that were simply not developed due to time constraints during production, or they may be intentional voids, spaces left empty to suggest that the world is larger and less known than what the player has access to. The Mojave's unexplored spaces are similarly present and pressing. Beyond the canyon wreckage that blocks the path toward Lonesome Road territory, beyond the game's borders in every direction, the world continues in ways that are not depicted. The Long 15 that connects the Mojave to California is referenced repeatedly but never shown. Nevada exists as a fragment rather than a state. The world's unshown spaces are as much a part of the Fallout universe's mystery as its depicted ones. The question of what is in those spaces, what the wasteland of Texas looks like, what survived in the Midwest, what the Pacific Coast looks like beyond the few glimpses the games provide, is a question the series has been building toward for 28 years without answering. Each new game chooses a new location and populates it with content, but the total map of post-war America remains mostly blank, which is itself a kind of mystery. We know a great deal about specific places. We know almost nothing about what connects them. Section 29. Small mysteries that fill the gaps. Every Fallout game is dense with small mysteries that do not command entire analyses, but deserve a moment of attention before they slip back into the texture of the wasteland. The burnt book in a Vault 111 residence quarters, too charred to read, its content permanently lost. Whatever someone felt was important enough to bring into a cryogenic vault is gone. The chess set in the Pridwin's common area with all the pieces on the black side and none on the white. Someone was playing against themselves and lost, or playing against someone who stopped coming to finish the game. A series of identical paintings found in different locations across the Commonwealth, always the same image, always in different spaces, suggesting either a prolific artist or a mass-produced item that survived in scattered fragments. The dog kennels outside Vault 81, with chains still attached and collars still in them, but no dogs. Where did they go? Did the vault residents eat them during hard times? Did they escape and become ancestors of the feral dogs encountered elsewhere? A mannequin positioned in a window in Diamond City, facing outward, holding what appears to be binoculars. Someone set this up deliberately, or it arrived at this configuration through coincidence. The game does not say. The terminal in a random Commonwealth building that is password protected, with no way to access it in normal gameplay, and no adjacent context for what it contains. A sealed door with nothing behind it, which might be a design oversight or a deliberate gesture toward a world that contains more than the player can ever reach. The radio signal in New Vegas, that plays only static but repeats on a pattern that is not random. If you listen long enough, the pattern suggests structure, some kind of organization beneath the noise. The game never decodes it. It is either a texture detail that was never fully implemented, or a mystery that was built without providing its own resolution. The skeleton in the Lucky 38 Hotel in New Vegas, that is dressed in a tuxedo and holding a room key. The room the key opens contains nothing unusual. Why is this particular skeleton dressed formally? What was this person doing in a building that has been sealed for 2 centuries? And why were they dressed as if for an occasion? The friendly Deathclaw in Fallout 4, that appears in a single location and does not attack the player even at relatively low levels. Deathclaws are universally described as aggressive apex predators. This one is not. Nothing in the game explains it. It is simply there. A large predator that has decided, apparently for reasons of its own, not to be a problem today. The child's drawing taped to the wall in almost every vault you visit across the series. The same approximate drawing. Different crayons. Different slightly wrong proportions. A family, a son, a house. This image has been made by children before catastrophe in every vault across the wasteland, and it has survived while the children who made it did not. Whether this is intentional design commentary or simply a texture that got reused extensively, its effect is identical. It is the most universal human artifact in a setting about how poorly humans treated each other. The last message on a terminal in a cave near Diamond City, from someone named Eduardo who was trying to find his way to a settlement and got lost. His final entry reads, "I think I found the way out. The terminal is in a dead end. There is no way out visible." Whether Eduardo escaped through a way the terminal could not document, or whether this is his last recorded thought before his death, is not resolved by the environment. The peculiar scarcity of cats in the early Fallout games. Dogs appear. Animals of every mutated kind appear. But cats are conspicuously absent for much of the series' early history. When they finally appear in Fallout 4, their presence is treated as unremarkable, but the question of where they were in the earlier games remains one of the stranger small mysteries in the lore. One theory suggests cats were wiped out in the immediate aftermath of the war. Another notes that cats were simply not a priority for early developers. Neither theory fully satisfies. The cat's absence, once noticed, creates a specific puzzle-shaped gap in the world. The Vault Boy's original creator, the actual artist or design team who produced that cheerful cartoon figure, remains unnamed and uncelebrated in the lore. Someone drew it, gave it the thumbs up that doubles as a nuclear blast distance gauge, approved the color palette of yellow and blue. That person worked at Vault-Tec thinking they were helping design a survival program, not the world's most elaborate pre-war social experiment. Their creation has survived 200 years of nuclear fallout and become one of the most recognizable images in gaming. They will never know. Section 30. What endurance costs. The long-lived and what they carry. The oldest characters in the Fallout universe have been alive for experiences that most humans will never approach. The ghoul in the TV show remembers his daughter's birthday party, the smell of a particular morning, the sound of a weatherman on television. He remembers everything that came after. He has been alive for the entire history of the post-war world, and for a slice of the world before it. What does that much time actually do to a person? The games answer this differently across different characters. Raul Tejada in New Vegas answers it with humor and a resignation that is not despair exactly, but sits in that territory. He has learned not to care too deeply about any particular person or thing, because caring deeply, across the long stretch, becomes something the mind cannot sustain. His losses are too numerous for individual grief. He has arrived at something like a diffuse, general melancholy that he manages with jokes and competence. Roy Phillips in Fallout 3 answers it with bitterness. The world took something from him, repeatedly and over a long time, and he has decided that the world owes him restitution. His tragedy is not his age or his ghoulification. It is that he has the same fundamental wants a person always has: community, safety, respect, and a world that keeps refusing to provide them because of what he looks like. The years have not mellowed him. They have simply accumulated the grievance. The ghoul in the TV show answers it, at least through much of his story, with a kind of emotional quarantine. He has walled off the person he was before. He does not think about Cooper Howard, because thinking about Cooper Howard is a path towards something he cannot afford, while maintaining function. He is kept moving by the possibility that his family survived, that the people he is looking for are still somewhere in this world. When that possibility seems to be confirmed, something opens in him that has been closed for a very long time. The emotion that emerges is not clean. It has 200 years of pressure behind it. The cost of enduring for that long is not simply loneliness or accumulated loss. It is the experience of being the one who did not die, of watching everything you knew become historical, of being older than the oldest institutions in the wasteland, and carrying that age as a kind of isolation that nothing can fully bridge. A ghoul who was alive before the war speaks to post-war survivors across a gap that cannot be completely closed. The lived experience of the world that ended is not transmissible through language. It can be described but not communicated. The mysterious quality of the long-lived Fallout characters is not their survival. It is the gap between who they were and who they became, and the question of whether continuity of memory is enough to constitute continuity of self across that distance. Cooper, Howard, and the ghoul share the same memories and the same name and the same face, more or less. They do not share the same person. The transformation that 200 years of post-nuclear survival worked on him is too thoroughgoing for that. Section 31. Endings that are also beginnings. Every Fallout game ends with the implication of something continuing. The slideshows of New Vegas, the various endings of Fallout 3 and 4 and 76, all describe what happens after the player character's story concludes, but they describe it briefly and in broad strokes. The wasteland continues. The factions adapt to whatever outcome the player produced. People are born and die in the ruins of the old world, and the gradual, halting construction of the new. The mystery of the Fallout universe is partly the mystery of all historical fiction. What comes next? The games give you an ending, and then the ending opens into implication. The choice you made at the climax of New Vegas ripples outward into a future the game does not depict. The destruction of the Institute changes the power dynamics of the Commonwealth in ways that the game describes in epilogue slides but does not dramatize. The TV show is now the primary space where the implications of game endings are being explored and reconsidered. It is set in 2296, years after the events of most of the games, and the world it depicts has not followed any single game ending's logic cleanly. Things that seemed like conclusions have been reopened. The NCR has been hit hard. New Vegas is the site of ongoing conflict. The Enclave, believed destroyed, is reconstituting. Everything that felt like resolution in the games is in the process of being revised by a world that kept moving after the credits rolled. That revision is the proper condition of a living fictional universe. A world that is finished cannot generate new stories. A world that is always still in process, still being shaped by consequences that have not fully played out, still carrying questions that have not been resolved, is a world where storytelling can continue without the exhaustion that comes from having settled everything. The Fallout universe has survived 28 years, in part because its builders understood this about world building. They created a setting with more questions than answers, more implications than conclusions, more history than any single playthrough could access. They created something that rewards the curious without ever fully satisfying curiosity. The wasteland is patient, the mysteries wait. The next time you crouch behind ruined cover, or open a terminal, or find a holotape in a coat pocket in an abandoned room, something is there waiting to be found. And it is probably not the last thing. There is always one more mystery just past the next ridge, in the room at the end of the corridor you had not yet reached. There always will be. Section 32. The Art of Staying Curious. There is a particular skill that the Fallout universe rewards, and it is the skill of noticing. Most games reward combat effectiveness, resource management, and character optimization. Fallout rewards these things too, but it also rewards the player who stops to read the terminals, who backtracks to find the audio log, who notices that the arrangement of bodies in a room tells a story, who picks up the note from under the mattress and wonders who put it there. The player who develops this habit experiences a different Fallout than the player who does not. Not better in terms of mechanical outcomes, but richer. More populated with people who were here before and left traces. This is what good historical fiction does at its best. It populates the past with sufficient specificity that individuals emerge from the background, with enough detail that people feel like they had lives rather than simply existing as historical actors. The Fallout universe accomplishes this across hundreds of hours of content, and the effect, for players who engage with it fully, is a kind of attachment to a ruined world that is difficult to explain to anyone who has not experienced it. People love Fallout because it makes them care about a wasteland, because it communicates the specific weight of loss through environmental detail rather than through direct statement. Walking through the ruins of something, piecing together what it was and what happened to it, produces a form of empathy that reading about ruins does not. You feel the absence of the thing rather than simply understanding that it is gone. The mysteries are part of this. The questions that do not have answers create a specific emotional engagement. The mild frustration of wanting to know more. The satisfaction of finding a partial answer. The patience required to sit with ambiguity. These are the feelings of genuine historical engagement. The same feelings that make people spend careers studying incomplete records from periods too old to offer direct testimony. The Fallout universe gives us a post-apocalyptic America and asks us to care enough about it to want to understand what happened there. The fact that so many people do, across nearly 3 decades of games and now a television series, suggests that the human impulse toward historical empathy is deep and persistent, and that it can be engaged by fiction as effectively as by fact when the fiction is built with enough care. A player who has spent 200 hours with the Fallout games does not simply know facts about a fictional universe. They have spent time in a world, built a relationship with its specific geography and population and texture, developed opinions about its factions and characters, felt genuinely affected by things that happened in it. That is the mark of a fictional universe that has been built well enough to be inhabited rather than simply visited. The mysteries are what keep the habitation feeling ongoing. They are what make the wasteland feel like there is always more to know, always another layer, always something that the previous time through did not reach. You can return and find things you missed. You can share discoveries with other players and learn that they found things you never did. The world is large enough that no single perspective exhausts it. Section 33. The question no one can answer. After 28 years and more games than can be comfortably listed, after a TV series that has become one of Amazon's most watched programs, after thousands of hours of community analysis and theory, there is one question about the Fallout universe that still does not have an answer that everyone accepts. Was it worth it? The question is not about the games or the TV show. It is a question the world itself poses, in the form of its existence. Was the civilization that built the vaults, the power armor, the nuclear cars, the Nuka-Cola, the cheerful corporate branding over scientific horrors, was that civilization worth the period of destruction its collapse produced? Is what is being built in the ruins, however slowly and inadequately, worth the cost of building it? The Fallout universe does not answer this. It cannot. The question does not have a clean answer, and the franchise has been honest enough not to pretend otherwise. What it offers instead is the specific texture of living in the question. The wasteland is not simply a backdrop. It is a sustained meditation on consequence, on what happens when the things people build outlast the intent behind them, on how long the past keeps shaping the present even as the present is trying to move past it, on what it costs to endure long enough to see whether the thing you survived was worth surviving. The people in the Fallout universe are, mostly, doing their best with what they have. They are building settlements and founding factions, and maintaining radio stations, and running vaults that have already failed, and trying to find clean water, and deciding what to do with the weapons they inherited, from a war that ended before they were born. They are not choosing between good and evil in most cases. They are choosing between inadequate options in a world that has severely limited the available choices. That is, in its way, the most honest thing about the Fallout universe. It does not tell you that good choices are easy, or that the right side always wins. It tells you that the world is complicated and damaged, and still full of people who are doing something with what they have, and that what they do with it matters even if the outcomes are uncertain. The mysteries stay mysterious, because the world is not done yet. Every question that remains open is a space where the story might still go. Every character whose fate is undecided might still make a choice that changes something. The wasteland is patient. It has been waiting for answers for 200 years, and it will wait longer. So will we. Thank you for spending this time in the wasteland with me. Every mystery we have walked through tonight is a thread in a larger picture. A picture that the Fallout universe has been building across 3 decades and is still building. The questions you leave with are the same ones that will be waiting when the next game or season arrives. If this kept you company, if it helped you drift, if it filled the quiet in a way that felt right, then it did what it was made for. Like if you want. Subscribe if you want more. There is always more. The Wasteland thanks you for visiting. End of complete script. Section 34. The geography of grief. Every location as a memorial. There is a way of thinking about the Fallout universe that the games themselves sometimes gesture toward but rarely make fully explicit. Every location is a memorial. Every ruined building, every abandoned subway car, every collapsed highway overpass was built by people who expected it to last, who built it for a purpose that they intended to continue fulfilling. The purpose stopped. The structure remained. What you walk through when you walk through the wasteland is a landscape of interrupted intention, full of things that were supposed to become something, and instead became evidence of having been interrupted. The Museum of History in Fallout 3 is an institution that was built to preserve the past for future generations. It is now itself a historical artifact in a city of historical artifacts, the institution of memory having become an object of memory. Super mutants occupy its upper floors. The exhibits are still there, barely. The placards still describe what the exhibits contain, though many of the exhibits are scattered or destroyed. The museum intended to tell the story of American history to visitors, and now tells a different story to explorers, the story of what happened to American institutions in the war. The National Archives in Fallout 3, which contains the Declaration of Independence among its remaining documents, is visited by the player as part of a quest to retrieve that document for an archivist named Abraham Washington, who collects pieces of pre-war American history in an effort to preserve something of the country that was. The Declaration of Independence in the Wasteland has no legal force. There is no government to enforce it, no framework of law that it establishes, no citizenry that it speaks to in any politically meaningful way. Abraham Washington treats it as sacred regardless of this. He wants to hold it. He wants it to exist somewhere in the world. That desire, to preserve a document that has lost all practical function but retains enormous symbolic weight, is one of the most human things in Fallout 3. The Declaration of Independence is a mystery in the setting. What does it mean in a world where the nation that created it no longer exists? Does a founding document retain meaning after the thing it founded is gone? Washington believes it does. The game does not tell you he is wrong. The Arlington Cemetery in the Capitol Wasteland is one of the most recognizable pieces of the game's geography for anyone who has spent time in Washington, D.C. The rows of white markers are in place, somewhat jumbled, some toppled, some still standing. No one is maintaining them. No one is burying new people in them. The cemetery was built to honor the military dead of a nation, and the nation is gone, but the dead are still there and the markers, deteriorating slowly, are still marking them. The Lincoln Memorial, where a community of escaped slaves called the Undergrounders has taken refuge, makes explicit the layers of historical resonance in the Capitol Wasteland. Lincoln freed slaves. The memorial to Lincoln is now sheltering people who are running from the mechanized equivalent of slavery, as practiced by the slavers who operate in the region. The history is not decorative. It is structurally present in what is happening at the location. Museum of Freedom and Concord in Fallout 4 is one of the first major locations in that game, the building where you find the power armor and the minigun and the first Brotherhood soldier you meet. The museum was built to celebrate American liberty. The people sheltering in it when the game begins are under attack from raiders and are not particularly free. The irony is not aggressive. It is simply present. One more layer of meaning in a landscape built from the wreckage of meaning. The Sanctuary Hills neighborhood where the sole survivor lived before the war is one of Fallout 4's most carefully constructed emotional environments. It is your house. The specific version of your house, with your furniture still in place after 210 years, your belongings still where you left them, the crib in your son's room with the toys you chose still in it. The neighborhood has been taken over by vegetation and decay, and the specific patina that 200 years of neglect deposits on everything, but it is recognizable as a neighborhood. The street plan is intact, the houses still stand, the backyard is still a backyard. Coming back to Sanctuary Hills later in the game as the center of a settlement, rebuilding in the space where you once lived, is one of the most emotionally textured things Fallout 4 offers. You are not just building, you are building on top of your own past, which is now archaeological. The place that was your home has become history, and you are living in the history, and the gap between those two versions of the same space is the gap between before and after the war, collapsed into the geography of a single neighborhood. The entire map of Fallout 4's Commonwealth is organized around this principle. Every location was something before, has been transformed by time and event, and now carries the weight of both its original purpose and its current state. The Mass Bay Medical Center was a hospital. The Museum of Witchcraft was a tourist attraction. Trinity Tower was an office building. Each of them holds evidence of what it was, alongside the evidence of what happened to it, and walking through them is the Fallout experience at its most specific and concentrated. The Boston Harbor area, near the USS Constitution, carries a particularly layered history in the game. The real Boston Harbor is where the Boston Tea Party happened, one of the founding events of American independence. The USS Constitution is a real ship, the oldest commissioned naval vessel afloat, and in Fallout 4, it has been retrofitted by robots called Robo-Brains, who believe themselves to still be crewing it, to still be in the service of a navy that has not existed for 200 years. They have made it flight-capable through adaptations that the real ship's designers could not have imagined, and they are attempting to sail it, except into the sky rather than the sea, because they have been operating without external input for so long that their mission parameters have decoupled from any recognizable naval objective. The USS Constitution is a memorial to a ship that is still, in a sense, operational. Its robots are maintaining it, updating it, protecting it from threats real and imagined. The mission continues in the absence of any context that would give the mission meaning. The Constitution is Fallout 4's most concentrated image of institutional persistence without institutional purpose. Still running, still crude, still defending something, and no longer connected to the reason any of those activities mattered. That image, an institution preserving itself past the point where its original purpose has any relevance, describes a great deal of what the post-war factions are doing. The Brotherhood is preserving military structure and technological doctrine in a world that is not the world those structures were built for. The Institute is maintaining scientific practice and hierarchy in service of goals that no longer make sense, given the world outside its walls. The Enclave is preserving political legitimacy claims for a government that no longer governs anything. Every ruin in the wasteland is also a mirror. Every preserved artifact, every maintained institution, every ritual or doctrine or loyalty that survived the war, is showing you something about what human beings do when the context that made their lives meaningful is destroyed. They maintain, they preserve, they keep going through the motions of things that once had purposes, because the alternative, admitting that the context is gone and the purpose with it, is a kind of annihilation that is harder to face than the physical devastation of the war itself. The Fallout universe, at its deepest, is asking whether there is a way to grieve what was lost, without being defined by that grief. Whether it is possible to carry the weight of what happened and still build something new. Whether the people who are trying to rebuild in the ruins can do so without simply reconstructing the same structures that produced the ruins, which is what most of the major factions are effectively attempting. The environmental storytelling of the games does not answer this. It presents the evidence and steps back. The answer, if there is one, is being developed slowly across games and seasons, in the spaces between the ruins, in the places where people are trying to do something that has not been done before, rather than something that was done and failed. The wasteland is a memorial. It is also a construction site, and the most interesting people in it are the ones who have figured out how to work in both registers at once. Section 35. The Last Thing. 200 mysteries. 30-something sections. Hours of walking through a universe that was designed to reward the patient and the curious, that was built with enough care and enough depth that new things keep emerging from it decades after the first game released. The mysteries we have explored tonight span the largest questions: who dropped the first bomb, what the vaults were actually for, whether the Fallout universe contains genuine supernatural elements, down to the smallest, why one Deathclaw decided not to attack, what was in the burnt book, who arranged the garden gnomes. None of them are fully resolved. That is the nature of the wasteland. It does not offer clean conclusions. It offers the experience of being in a world that has more history than any one perspective can contain, and of finding your way through that history with whatever tools and curiosity and patience you have brought with you. The next time you start a Fallout game, or watch the next season of the show, or read the next piece of lore, you will find something that connects to something else, that adds a layer to something you thought you already understood, that raises a question you had not thought to ask. The wasteland keeps producing these moments. It is very good at them. And that capacity, to keep producing moments of discovery after this long, is itself the answer to the question of whether the Fallout universe is worth the time it asks you to spend in it. It is. The mysteries are worth it. The questions are worth sitting with. Rest well. The wasteland will be there when you return.